what is the creepiest or most unexplained thing that's happened to you that you still think about to this day? I was living in Boston. I woke up at 3 a.m. or so by my cat jumping up on my bed and curling in between my calf muscles and going to sleep. My cat would do this every night since I was 5 years old. That was his spot. It was something I was very familiar with. Thing is, my cat was living with my parents on the West Coast, so I couldn't understand what the hell I just felt. But I knew it was my cat. I just figured I was dreaming. Got a call from my parents the following morning that my cat died around midnight the previous night. 3 hours behind since I was on the East Coast. Guess that was my cat traveling to Boston to come see me one last time. Edit. After so many replies, I gotta say this. Really, I wasn't dreaming. I remember it quite well. I said maybe I was dreaming because I'm doubtful myself. But thinking back, yeah, I was wide awake and realized my experience. Despite being a fun believer in ghosts, suspension of belief, I haven't had any other experiences other than this. This is my own experience and I expect and appreciate the doubt, but call it what you will. Story 2. Maybe around age 14, early 90s. We were traveling from Texas up to Tacoma, Washington. We were about out of money, almost out of gas, no food, stuck in Chico, California. I sat in the car while Mom took my younger sisters to the restroom at a gas station. I was riddled with anxiety about our situation and looking down. The car door opened and I looked up. A lady that looked like a brown-haired Brady mom sat in the seat and faced me. She said, "Seems like you're down on your luck. Take this and give it to your mom. Tell her to pay it forward someday to someone who needs it." I looked down into my hand and there was a $100 bill. I looked up and she had disappeared. Nowhere in the parking lot, just vanished. I cried. When Mom came back, I told her what happened and she cried. We got gas. There was a guy selling oranges on the side of the road and we bought a bag and went to a local park that had a part of the river with a little spillway dam and went swimming and ate oranges for a couple hours before getting back on the road. I never saw the lady again, but she saved us, and we did make it up to Tacoma to start our new life. Thank you, stranger lady with invisible powers. We never forgot your kindness. Story 3. In college, I was roommates with my childhood best friend for about 2 years. We were very trusting with each other. We would go into each other's rooms freely and grab whatever we needed. To borrow clothes, hairbrush, perfume, etc. No questions asked, just a knock if we were in the room to let each other know we were going in. Our rooms are across the hall from each other, with the hall facing the kitchen. So from the kitchen, you could see down the hall where our rooms were. At the time, my friend had very long black hair and she's very fair-skinned. One day, I get home from work, with my headphones in my ear talking to my mom about my day. I go in the kitchen and grab a snack. I see her walk out of her room and go into mine, leave my room and go back into hers. She looked like she just got out the shower. Her hair was soaking wet and she was wrapped in a white towel. Her long black wet hair is what I distinctly remember. Also, she made no eye contact with me, but I didn't think it was weird. I didn't say anything to her since borrowing each other's stuff was normal. I'm still on the phone with my mom, so I don't think much of it. I grab my snack, hang up with my mom, and go into my room to watch TV. I figured she's getting ready to go somewhere and we'll talk later. About an hour passes and I go to the kitchen to clean the plate I ate on. I see her in the kitchen making something to eat and I tell her, "Hey, what did you grab from my room earlier? Did you find what you needed?" She looks at me like if I was crazy and says, "What are you talking about?" So I say, "Yeah, earlier when I got home, I saw you go into my room and grab something. Did you get what you needed?" Sorry, I didn't say hi. I was on the phone with my mom. She asked me if I'm sure I saw her. I said yes, 100%. She tells me to grab my phone and go to her car ASAP, that she needs to show me something. I had my phone on me, and she grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter along with her purse, and she drags me out the front door and into her car. She then tells me she got home maybe 5 minutes before we started talking. She had spent the night at her boyfriend's and hadn't been home all day, so she has no idea who I saw. I'll never forget the look on her face when she told me this. Complete fear and panic. She called the cops and they came along with the apartment manager. They checked the whole apartment and found no one. Nothing amiss. And they were in there a while, checking every nook and cranny. The manager got maintenance to change our locks and gave us new keys that day. My friend then tells me that for a week, she'd been hearing noises from her bathroom, like bottles moving, and when she went to check, she found nothing. I have no idea who I saw going in and out of our rooms, but it looked exactly like my friend. I don't drink or do drugs. I'm not on meds. This was in 2014, and I still freak out when I think about it. Yeah, this is kind of spooky, kind of eerie, but considering she looks exactly like the roommate, I don't know. I think maybe a little prank might be getting played here. I mean, obviously, it's either that or a ghost. Story 4. Once I was hired to load firewood into my aunt's basement. She lives alone and left the basement door open for me while she went out. I usually swing the interior basement door as wide as I can when I walk in, and the door almost never closes completely, but once I heard it close, and when I was about to grab another load, I saw that the deadbolt locked. When I walk in, my arms are filled with firewood, so I wouldn't be able to lock it myself. Looked out the window and checked the garage to see if she came home, but she wasn't there. The door itself was enclosed, so no wind shut it. I tried various ways of slamming the door so it would lock by itself, but nothing worked. It's an isolated house, so I would have heard someone drive up, and it's highly unlikely someone walked over just to lock the door and leave it and time it while I was piling up firewood, and there's wooden steps, so I would have heard someone walking down them. It's the only time I've seen a deadbolt lock itself in my life. Story 5. Just a normal Saturday night. I was watching TV home alone with my 2 dogs when I heard a banging sound coming from the basement. Legit sounded like somebody was just banging something on the appliances we had down there. Now, there's no access into the basement from down there, only through the upstairs rooms that I was in, and knew nobody could have come in and got past me. So with this knowledge, I was not as scared as you may think. More curious as to what the heck the noise was. One of the 2 dogs, who's a meathead and wants to fight everybody, also heard the noise and was now bolting down into the basement to investigate. I get down and see that it's my other dog, banging his head into our dryer and chest freezer, which are next to each other. My meathead dog is just standing there, watching, confused. So I approach my other dog and calm him down, and we all go back upstairs. Now, this freaked the heck out of me and upset me, as it seems such very strange behavior for my dog to do. Fast forward only 30 minutes or so. The banging starts again. I instantly look over to my dog, but he's laying down, but now also aware of the noise downstairs. We run down into the basement, and it's Meathead now banging his head in between the appliances. Again, I now calm Meathead down, and we all go back upstairs. Nothing has ever happened again since that night. 3 years now. So that ruled out brain tumors, which is what I read online about why maybe dogs bang their heads. But 2 dogs, suddenly on the same night, and it only affecting one of them at any given time? 3 years and the 3 of us never talk about that night, lol. Edit. To answer a few questions, yes, I've posted this story before. I have a very normal life, and this story is just way out there, but legit truthful to my otherwise mundane life. A few folks say that it may have been a rodent/treat/toy they were after. No, they were frenzied and hyperventilating. When they get things stuck under anything, they just cry and get me to get their stuff. I guess it boils down to just knowing your dogs. I know instantly from their body language just what the deal is. But that night, I've never seen them so frenzied and upset. Also, it is otherwise a very nice basement, as basements go. I've never had a pest problem down there or in any other part of the house. Somebody mentioned that if it only happened 3 years ago, why did I not make a video of it? My first instinct was to help my dogs to stop them harming themselves. At no point was my first thought to go and grab my phone to capture the moments on film. Really surprised I have to mention that one. But people/keyboards/warriors. Story 6. I've shared this before, but it still confuses the hell out of my family. Edit. This happened last year. I copy and pasted it from my original post. The beginning of the story says last night, but this was almost a year ago. We moved out of that house about 6 months after this happened. My husband recently took an overnights job to help us out during COVID. He's only been there about 2 weeks and works evenings and overnights, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Last night was no different. He left home around 8:15 p.m. Our daughter, age 11, and I decided to make it a movie night. Around 11 p.m., I heard keys in my back door and the usual sounds my husband makes when he comes home. I creep out to the kitchen to make sure it was him, and it was. He told me he needed to grab his knee compression sleeve, walks down the hall, says hi to our daughter as he passes the living room, and goes upstairs. He came back down, gave me a kiss, and left again. We finished our movie and went to bed. In the morning, when he got home, I made a joking comment about him forgetting his knee sleeve. He was genuinely confused, as I recalled the previous night. Our daughter confirmed everything I said, and he still was acting confused. I pulled up our security motion camera on my phone to show him when he popped in real quick. But there was no footage from the night before, or any other night, of him coming home after he's left for work. My daughter and I both heard him, saw him, and I touched him. but he was never home during that time. Nothing else out of the ordinary happened that night. We seriously have no idea what happened. Edit to clarify. There's footage of that night, but it doesn't show him coming home at that time. The camera was on the back porch, not inside the house. We had 2 carbon monoxide detectors, one on each floor of the house. We moved out a few months later for unrelated reasons. Story 7. I apologize for grammar and spelling mistakes. There's a kid in another class in my school in 6th grade that was a genius. I don't mean like, oh, he's really smart because he doesn't need to do the homework and still gets hundreds. Like, he was doing advanced calculus with a local college professor after school. This kid was smarter than everyone. So one day our computer system for the entire school goes down. I was in a poorer area at the time, so this was normal. This occurred many times, so normally it would affect us because we barely used laptops and such. The only class that was affected was the computer class. This kid was in the computer class. 3 or so hours later, when I'm in class with him during social studies, 3 guys with FBI jackets on and our local chief escorted him out of the building. We were told nothing. The parents were told nothing. It never hit the news. To this day, we have no clue what he did, except every single teacher I've asked about this says they were also told nothing. I haven't seen the kid since, and I can't find a trace of him going to another school or ending up in trouble. He just fell off the face of the earth with his parents. Yeah, forgot to mention that parents also disappeared, and no one really looked for them after a month or so. I still think about that kid. Story 8. My Nana, great-grandma, and Mum were very close, but lived overseas from one another my whole life. They talked on the phone every Sunday, but because it was an international call, it was extremely expensive. So they took turns calling every Sunday at 8 a.m. to make the cost equal. However, due to a 4-minute difference in clocks, Nana always ended up calling at 8:04. Also, the caller ID never showed up. Mum called on a Sunday, Nana died on a Tuesday. The following week, we're sitting at the table eating breakfast, and Mum notices it's 7:50 a.m. Nana would have been calling any minute. She gets emotional. I comfort her. Then at 8:04 a.m., the mother effing phone rings. The caller ID reads, unknown caller. We look at each other like, what is this, some sort of joke? She answers. There's nothing but static at the other line and some garbled voice recording. The only decipherable words in it are, we hope you enjoy your trip to paradise. Click. Phone shuts off. Absolutely no explanation for that one. Still baffles me to this day. Edit. I've been wanting to tell this story for years now, but every time I find a creepy/inexplicable thread, it gets buried. So glad people are finally hearing this one, lol. Some have said maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank, but I'd prefer to see it as Nana sending us one last hoorah. She really loved my mum a lot, as we did her too. She was a really kooky lady, and this ending was extremely fitting of her. Story 9. I was driving home from work on a long, somewhat dark road. I'll admit I was tired and cold and just wanted to get home. Speed limit was 60 mph and I was doing closer to 70. Suddenly, a girl with long blonde hair, a black coat with brown fur on the hood, and jeans just showed up in front of my car. I knew there was another car to my left up ahead, but it was black and all I saw was that it was stopped before I saw her. I managed to maneuver around her. I was freaked out. I turned to a side street and stopped to figure out what was happening. Then a tall guy with a black coat and short hair gets out of the driver's side of the stopped car, grabbed her, dragged her to the car while she was fighting him, and put her back in the car. I called the police and gave them the description of the car and the direction it took off in. I never heard anything about it, and I've not stopped thinking about her since. It's been 2 years. Edit. Just in case anyone is curious or could even know something, the location was Lincoln, Rhode Island, US, next to the high school. January to February of 2019. The car was a new black sports, maybe, car, with the tail light going all the way across the back of the car. George Washington Highway. Story 10. I've shared this before, but I still think it's an interesting story. I was exploring the area behind my house shortly after we moved in. The area back there had once been a small quarry that had since filled with water. It was a bit of pond that supposedly went straight down 60 feet if you stepped into it. I was walking along the edge and I came across a backpack filled with old video game cartridges and a set of clothing just laying on the ground. They were for the N64 and we found this around 2004, so they were outdated. Next to it was a set of clothing. The clothes were laying on the ground, spread out, pants and shirt, so it looked like someone laying down. They looked like they'd been there a long time. Same with the backpack. I told my parents and they called the cops. There had been no reports of missing children or anything in the area. We never got an explanation, but it was weird. Edit. Just to answer some questions, I don't think it was a prank. While we were new to the neighborhood, we were renters. Also, most of our neighbors were elderly. This happened in a rural Virginia town, and I can't imagine anyone wasting cartridges like that, since most kids were lucky to have an N64. No people, adult or child, had been reported by families or the neighborhood as missing for years. They never searched the quarry because they never had any reason to think there was something wrong. My sister and I went out there every day for a year or so and just avoided that spot because I was creepy. As far as I know, they're still out there. Story 11. My girlfriend and I are in a long-distance relationship. We typically take turns traveling between each other's countries, Australia and Canada. About 2 years ago, it was my turn to travel over to Australia to stay with her and her mom. For a bit of background, my girlfriend's room was built as an extension/add-on to their garage. So to get to it, you had to walk through their garage to get to her room. About a couple weeks into my trip over there, I wake up at around 1 a.m. and the room is just glowing red. I look up at the ceiling and I see this black figure crawling through the ceiling. It moved in such an inhuman way, almost like it was breaking every one of its bones to move. I start screaming, which wakes my girlfriend up, and she looks up at the ceiling and starts to scream as well. Instinctively, I grab my pillow and whip it at the figure. The next thing I know, everything went black, and I'm waking up a few hours later. My girlfriend is fast asleep, so I think it was just some weird dream. At that point, I have to go to the washroom, so I walk through the garage and try to quietly open the garage door to get into the main house. Previously, her mom had mentioned that she was getting annoyed with us staying up late at night and going through the garage door to use the washroom, since her mom's room was down the garage door hallway. Each time we would open it, the door would click loudly and wake her up. So I'm standing there at the garage door and I try to open it as quietly as possible. As I turn the handle and the door clicks, I push it open. Her mom just starts screaming at the top of her lungs. I thought it was out of rage for waking her up, so I immediately close the door and speed walk back to my girlfriend's room. I climb into bed and gently nudge her awake to tell her that her mom is screaming. She gets up and goes to see whether her mom is still angry and try to de-escalate the situation. About 20 minutes goes by and my girlfriend comes back into the room completely silent. She asks me if I saw the room glowing red earlier, as well as a figure on the ceiling. I say yes, and she goes wide-eyed and says she thought it was just a dream too. She then says that her mom wasn't screaming at me. Apparently, when I opened the door, it did wake her up, but when she woke up, there was a black figure standing at the foot of her bed, and it was slowly moving towards her. She then experienced a blackout as well, and was woken up by my girlfriend checking in on her. Yeah, the entire house slept with the lights on for a month after that. Yeah, screw sleeping with the lights on. I'm just not going to sleep there anymore. If you got a contortionist crawling on your ceiling under like a red black light, what in the world? That is nuts. Story 12. Well, not the scariest thing ever, but when I was 11, my family and I moved to another town because of my dad's job. We were only going to stay there for a year, and thankfully we were given a house in a closed community of about 20 houses made for army officials and their families. So one day my parents are out and they take my baby sister. My older sister is in a friend's house and I'm left alone with our dog for like 2 hours. I was playing in my room when I remembered that the black socks for my Monday uniform, kind of like a suit you wear on Mondays, are drying in the backyard. I go there with my dog and utter out loud, "I wish there was something to do." And not a moment later, I hear some young voice say very clearly, "Then let's play." I turn around to see my normally hyperactive Golden sitting looking at me like nothing has happened. I freak out immediately and ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom. I turn on the TV and hide under the covers until my family arrived. They saw me sweating, scared, and paranoid at this point. They never figured out what happened, but tried to make me feel better. Now, the part that freaks me is that each of the houses in the community was surrounded by 3-meter-tall cinder block walls. The place where my socks were was next to a wall separating from another house, one that had no children. The other house to the left was over 20 meters away and behind another wall, and the wall behind my house separated us from nothing but a steep hill. There was no one who could have said that, and to this day, it freaks me out every time I think of it. Story 13. When I was in high school, I would always be the first to arrive home out of my family, having the entire house to myself. I've never been superstitious or someone who's scared easily, and the hour I had alone was my favorite time of the entire day. My bedroom is upstairs, and one day when I got home from school, I placed my bag away and started up the stairs. About halfway, I stopped because I thought I heard something coming from upstairs, so I stayed and listened. I heard a very slow rendition of the melody from Ring Around the Rosie, crystal clear, coming from my bedroom. I was 100% sure I was the only one home, and I had absolutely no device that could be playing music unprompted, especially Ring Around the Rosie. I froze in fear and listened for about 15 seconds to make sure I was really hearing it, which I was. I just turned back down the steps and waited around the living room for my family to get home before I went back upstairs. I went in my room a few hours later and there was nothing out of the ordinary. I know it's not a very climactic story, but it's something I think about every now and then. I never told anyone about it because why would I? But that was the first time something truly strange happened to me. Story 14. We had a rescue dog years back, terrier mix. We lived in the countryside on a wooded hillside and owned about 5 acres of woodland and rough fields, mostly wild. This dog loved to be up there chasing rabbits, but loved her home too, so would never be gone for very long. One day she went missing. We took our other dogs up there and searched thoroughly, but nothing. We had another friend bring his dogs. Nothing. We advertised, put up posters. We did little but search high and low for 6 days, but nothing. On the 6th day, we had pretty much given up hope, but I decided to go up one last time because I had a hunch, a tickle in my belly, about one particular area which had already been thoroughly searched. I took a sickle and a pair of gardening gloves and hacked my way towards the center of a huge bramble patch. It was summer and all I could hear was bird song and insects, but suddenly I heard a muffled yip. I called her name and then heard her again getting excited. She was deep underground in a rabbit warren. I stayed calling to her until help arrived. The local fire brigade were kind enough to come and help and advise, and we got her out eventually. She ran around like a demented muddy pup, and amazingly, the vet said she was basically okay. Had probably been getting enough moisture from eating mud to keep her alive. I'm not generally a fanciful person, but I just knew in my knower she was there. No explanation for it. Story 15. I will dream a mundane conversation or activity, and a few months later, I'll be halfway through said action or conversation when the dream flashes back into my head. Despite knowing what's going to happen next, I'm unable to change any of it. The most memorable occurred when I was about 14 or 15. I played soccer at the time, and I had a dream about being in front of a mirror, like where the mirror and sink are separate from the rest of the bathroom, like at a hotel, and I was brushing my hair and putting it up like I always did before games. I quickly forgot about it, and a few weeks later, I accepted a position on a team that would be going to a national tournament in Tennessee. Flash forward like 6 months, and I'm in the hotel brushing my hair, exactly like in the dream. The mirror, sink, and room are exactly the same. Nothing else eventful happens, and I shake off the uncomfortable feeling and move on with my day. I talked to my dad about it at dinner one night that week, and he said that it happens to him sometimes as well. I mean, if you're reading this and thinking the same thing, this is called deja vu, guys. Like, I'm pretty sure just about everybody experiences this several times throughout their lifetime, so nothing uncommon, nothing supernatural about it. Deja frickin' vu. Story 16. In high school, AOL was new and chat rooms were super popular. I was 16 when we finally got the first PC and AOL and the whole works. Creepy old men would lurk in generally teenage-run chat rooms because creepy old men. Some guy started messaging me. He was in his late 30s, but it was the internet. Who knows if he really was? He could have been 78 for all anyone knew. I was a teenage girl. Why would I be interested? So I told him to not talk to me. He then made a fake account claiming he was a teenage boy, but then he started talking like he did before and I caught on. Why so much effort to talk to a plain 16-year-old? I filed complaints, but only so much can happen when he hasn't really done anything illegal. Whatever. So one day, my parents are out and my brother is gone. The home phone rings and it's him. He tells me he knows I'm alone. My parents are out. He knows what my house looks like. He describes it over the phone. He tells me he could easily come to me if I asked him. I told him I'm not amused and to just stop. He disappeared after. No idea. It was just weird. Still no clue. Edit. Well, crap, I had no idea this would gain any type of attention, let alone this many comments. I sincerely have no idea what happened. Maybe he was an expert mind effer and he was experimenting with how to really mess with someone. It worked though. I really have no idea who he was or where he lived since the internet was new and the accessibility to find information wasn't what it is today. He could have been a teacher, a 67-year-old man, a strung-out whack job down the street. A truck driver? Who knows? I just find it unbelievable that he disappeared and that he tried so hard to creep on a teenage girl. Ew. Story 17. We used to have a night out every Christmas with the lads from high school. We went back to one of the lads' houses and we were all drunk having a good time when one of the lads pointed into the kitchen and said, "Who's that?" The kitchen was like a box room. You could see the whole room from the doorway. I had my back to the wall where it was and turned to look in. The lights were off and there was no one there. We all looked and said, "What are you looking at?" He was adamant and just sat pointing and just said, "No, who are those two there?" The lad whose house it was looking in and turned on the light, and again, there was no one there. And we all said, "Are you okay? What are you on about?" He said, "Look, that fella's leaning on the worktop and the other is leaning and pointing and laughing at me." We all kept saying there was no one there. After a back and forth for about 10 minutes, he was describing what they were wearing, etc., and then the lad who could see these people realized we couldn't and started freaking out, tearing up and shaking uncontrollably, saying he had to get out of the house. He was shaking that much, we had to put his shoes on. Once he had gone and being drunk, no drugs that we knew of, we just laughed it off as him being off on one, but the lad whose house it was said he described his uncle and granddad, who had long since died, exactly how they used to stand and what clothes they were wearing. I wouldn't have believed it if I wasn't there, and honestly I still think he just had a mad episode. We've all met his granddad and uncle before they died, so it could have been some mental moment he had. To this day, anytime we mention it, he refuses to talk about it, and doesn't even entertain any notion of it. Like I said, it sounds far-fetched, but that is 100% true. I don't believe in ghosts, etc., and still think he had a moment, but it was genuinely weird and unsettling. Story 18. A friend and I from high school used to go out to this old country road and smoke a joint on a big hill facing a large, old brick house across the street that sat in a large field. The face of the house had 2 rows of 6 windows each, facing the road. One night, we were chilling on said hill and looking out at the house as the sun was going down, and all of a sudden, a light turned on in one of the windows and then shut off. Then another random window lit up, then shut off. It kept going, faster, faster. A window would light up and shut off and then go to another. It did it for about a minute and eventually was doing it so quickly it couldn't have possibly been a person going room to room or even a person with access to multiple switches at one time. After about a minute of speeding up to random flashes, it stopped. It simply didn't make sense. We both saw it. We talked about it many times afterward. The only thing we can figure is if the homeowner had some kind of automated lighting system hooked up to all the rooms and was messing with us. Other than that, I have no idea. Sketchy AF though. Story 19. My grandma and I both saw a dead person in our laundry room once. So, the laundry connected to the kitchen by a doorway. The doorway connected to the living room too. One afternoon, Grandma needed a hamper, so I followed her to the laundry. We saw the dead person as soon as we stepped foot in that doorway. It looked to be about my height. I was 6 or 7-ish, and totally black. Not as in a black person, but a literal black coating on its skin. It was slumped near the washing machine. We only saw it for a split second, enough time to register that it was there, and then it was gone. I remember my grandma saying, "Did you see that?" and laughing it off. She got the hamper and did her thing, and I just avoided the kitchen for a while. On a semi-related note, I used to have the freakiest nightmares in that house. I had nightmares so graphic, so often, that my pediatrician wanted me to see a therapist. Story 20. A few years ago, I was at the lowest point in life. Several people close to me had passed away unexpectedly. I was being bullied every day at my job. My life was falling apart. I was past being depressed. I just couldn't imagine waking up another day. So I'd planned my self-unaliving, bought a one-way plane ticket, got sleeping pills, and wrote a series of self-unaliving notes. On the day I was to fly out to fulfill my plan, there was a terrible accident on the freeway to the airport. It was shut down both ways, so I drove into a nearby pub to have a beer and wait out the traffic. The second I sat on the patio with my drink, a gentleman asked if he could sit with me. Whatever, I thought, sure, who cares? He told me that whatever I was doing next was a terrible idea and I would regret it. I thought, who is this random effer? But I listened. He said that he sensed I was in pain, but that I had an incredible life ahead of me, and that this was not the way my story was supposed to end. Again, I'd never met this guy in my life, and hadn't mentioned a word to him about my plan. He asked me to hand him my keys and my wallet, and he'd give them back to me after I talked and he listened. I poured my heart out to this random guy. Told him all my traumas and pains in life and why I was heading to the airport on a one-way ticket to unalive myself in a cemetery across the country where my family was buried. He just listened, and then he pulled out a lighter, asked me to pull out my self-unaliving letters, and helped me burn them. He told me I was worth so much to the world and that after I finished my drink, I needed to head home and get some sleep. He told me I was going to be okay tomorrow, and I believed him. He then gave me my keys and wallet back. I left that afternoon and went home, hugged my family, got some sleep, and the next day, I started working on myself, finding a therapist, a new job. Years later, I'm in a fantastic place in life, so far from where I was that day. To this day, no one in my life knows how close I came to unaliving myself, but this random stranger just somehow understood me and saved my life. I never saw him again. I don't even know his name. It's the most unexplained thing that's ever happened to me, and I think about that guy every day. So thank you, kind stranger, for saving my life that random September day on a pub patio. Story 21. When I was in 3rd grade, I moved to a new town and into a new house. We lived in a camper in the backyard of the house while we renovated it. It was a pretty old house. Anyway, during renovation, we found all sorts of stuff in the walls, old bottles, old pair of glasses, letters, old newspapers, old pictures of children, and school clothes. There was a 2-story house, and the stairs were kind of a focal point of all sorts of creepy stuff. So once you got to the top of the stairs, there was a little landing before it went into 2 bedrooms. At night, we would always leave the light on in the landing in case we had to get up to use the bathroom. Me and one brother shared a room, and the other room was for our older brother. I refused to sleep upstairs due to how creeped out I was, so I always slept downstairs on the couch. One weekend, my sister, who's older than both of my brothers, came to visit and was in my oldest brother's bedroom alone, as we were all at school and my mom was at work. As she was sitting up there watching TV, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs and called out as she had thought my mom was home early from work. No response other than the footsteps turning around and heading back down the stairs. When she got up to look, there was no one home and all doors locked. It doesn't stop there. My oldest brother was left home alone for a week while me and my other brother and mom and dad went on a week-long vacation. Naturally, he had his girlfriend over for a couple nights to keep him company. One night, she got up to pee around 3 a.m. and went downstairs to the bathroom where she said she heard children whispering. A couple nights later, around 3 to 4 a.m., the girlfriend woke my brother saying someone was in the house. They heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Since the light was on in the landing, they could see a shadow underneath the door, like someone was standing there, and the doorknob began to shake. Luckily, it was locked. They both started to freak out, and my brother jumped up out of the bed. We had some of those dumb display samurai-type swords that aren't even sharp, and he grabbed one of those and went towards the door. They heard more footsteps running down the stairs, and he bravely or stupidly followed down the stairs, where he was met with an empty house. All windows and doors closed and locked. He called the police, but nothing came of it. Story 22. Back in about 2008, I lived near my college in an apartment. My apartment was set back from the main road quite a bit and was in a wooded and hilly area. One night, I was out running near sundown. I'm at the bottom of a hill that's behind my apartment, so it was near the end of my run. I look up ahead at the top of the hill and notice 3 guys on bikes just sitting there. Being a 20-year-old female, my spidey senses start tingling. I tell myself I'm psyching myself out and it'll be fine, so I keep running. I'm about halfway up the hill. The 3 guys are still just sitting there, facing my direction. I don't have a phone or anything and nowhere else to go, so I tell myself I'll just run as hard as I can and scream if I need to. Suddenly, I hear something coming up beside me. I look to my right and I see a German Shepherd. He's running alongside me. I've never seen this dog before in my life. I can't explain it, but I just knew I'd be okay now. I continued running up the hill with this random dog beside me. When we're approaching the guys, this dog gets slightly ahead of me and runs directly in front of me instead of to my right. He gets to the guys and stops dead in his tracks. I continue running and pass the guys without even making eye contact. Once I'm past the guys, the dog catches back up to me and continues running alongside me. He stays with me until I take the turn into my apartment, that's very well lit, parking lot. He disappears into the trees as quickly as he appeared. I took that route at the exact same time every single day after that for weeks and would drive down that road often, hoping to come across him again. No luck, never saw him again. My friends are all convinced he was a guardian angel making sure I stayed safe. I'm not really a believer, so IDK, but it's the most creepy, bizarre, and awesome thing to ever happen to me. Yeah, guardian angel, that was the first thing that came into my mind as I was reading the story. Super cool, though, that it happened in dog form. Very nice. Story 23. I was probably about 16 to 17 and had just gotten home from high school. My brother was in the kitchen making a ruckus, so I started that way. As I passed by his bedroom, I saw my mom in there, sitting on his bed with the lights off, facing away from me and towards the wall. I stopped and just stood in the doorway and asked if she was okay and what she was doing. She said really slowly, "Just sitting. Come here, I need to talk to you." I took about a half step into the room when I heard my mom yelling for me in the kitchen and then saw her setting the table. I looked back to the bedroom and there was nothing there. I don't think I ever went back into that room by myself again, even 10 years later. Edit. Another story from the same house, since people seem to find this one interesting. One day, my mom and I were out doing yard work in the front of the house. At the time, we had a trampoline that sat in front of my bedroom window, which faced the driveway/road. My two little brothers were bouncing on it. They were probably 7 and 9 at the time, and my mom and I had sat down in a pair of lawn chairs to take a break. We were watching my little brothers play when suddenly they both stopped jumping and walked to the edge of the trampoline closest to my bedroom window and sat down, facing the window. They both started talking, but they were speaking as if they were having a conversation that we were only privy to half of. The older one, S, said something like, "Yes, yeah, they're good. No, okay," as if he was replying to someone asking him questions. My mom and I looked at each other like, "Are you hearing this right now?" And she asked them, "Who are you guys talking to?" Without looking away from the window, S said, "She says it's great-grandma. She says she misses you." My great-grandmother had died before my little brothers had been born. They had no idea what she looked like. My mom replied, "Great-grandma's in heaven, baby," to which he looked over at us and said, "Not anymore." They stared at the wall for a little longer and then started playing again as if nothing had ever happened. This was, again, one of many incidents that happened at that house. I left Florida in 2017, and while I've visited the family home many times since leaving, I'll never stay there at night by myself, and I try very hard not to leave the room I stay in. Story 24. I was walking my dog once around the pond in my grandmother's condominium gated community. It was supposed to storm that night, so it was windy all day, like tree branches violently flailing around and small items being blown away. I got to the front of my grandmother's building. There wasn't a soul in sight, and suddenly it got really quiet, which was weird because it was literally windy all day, but the wind suddenly stopped. I sort of looked around and felt off. It was the kind of quiet you could hear. Suddenly, a big gust of wind comes in and my dog starts freaking out. I tug him to come towards the building so I could put the code in to get us inside when suddenly I hear a voice go, "Hey," right behind me. It felt like it was right next to my ear. I turned around and there still wasn't anyone there, and my dog was still freaking out. So I dragged him inside, ran up the flight of stairs to my grandma's condo and locked the door. I still have no idea what happened to this day. Edit. I should mention the gated community has a lot of buildings with geriatric folks living in it beyond my grandmother's condo. The area was used during the tuberculosis outbreak to bring patients to basically die, and they would cremate their bodies in a now abandoned building at the center of the gated community. I've also seen shadows in the window of a tower whenever I went to the park nearby. Story 25. A few years ago, I took my dog out for a walk at night. The apartment complex I lived in at the time had enough light outside, so I was never scared of going out for a little walk. One night, as I walked down the stairs, I noticed a large brown furry thing under the stairs. I know for a fact there was 3 thin bushes under those stairs. But that night, whatever that thing is, was in between those bushes. I was too afraid to inspect it, so I walked the dog around the neighborhood for 5 minutes. When I got back, the large brown thing was gone. I stood there for a second before gathering up the courage to go up the stairs. My dog, however, refused to go. I scooped him up and ran up the stairs into the comfort of my own home. A few days later, I sat in the living room minding my own business. From the corner of my eye, I saw something brown and furry crawl from the ceiling into my room. That night, I had a dream I was being attacked by an unknown creature. I covered myself in my blanket, and it scratched and tore at it, yelling obscenities at me. I got angry and launched myself at it, punching and scratching at a large brown furry creature. When I woke up, my dog was there watching me and whining. IDK what to even think this was. Edit. Wow, I honestly expected this comment to get buried. Thanks to all of your input. I actually spoke to my mom about this, and what she said scares me even more. She's seen it crawl into rooms, but like me, chalked it up to her hair in her eye or something. However, she told me she's also dreamt of it. In her dream, she was paralyzed. It was running around her and taunting her. She tried so hard to start praying, but the words wouldn't come out. It got close to her face. She stared deeply into its demonic red eyes. She felt its fur touch her skin. When she broke out of her dream, my dog was staring at her, very close to her face. My dog almost got punched, LMAO. My mom's defense when she gets scared. So yeah, I guess we did see something in that apartment. Whatever it is, I'm glad we moved out and it didn't follow us. Story 26. I'm a skeptic about ghosts and otherworldly beings. This event that happened causes me some consternation because it doesn't make any sense, and I cannot explain what was happening. When I was in middle school, my family went camping in New Mexico. We were at a campsite near a lovely stream. My parents had one tent and my brother and I had another. As I was settling down to sleep for the night, I was listening to my headphones. I decided it was time to go to sleep, so I took my headphones off and was dozing off when I became hyper aware of a sound. It was a slight swishing/scratching sound on the side of the tent. I had just assumed there was a breeze and a stalk of grass was brushing on the side of the tent. With a sudden jolt, I realized there was no wind whatsoever. I asked my brother, "Jay, what's that?" He asked what I was referring to. I pointed out the scratching noise. He took his hand and hit the side of the tent. In response, whatever it was hit the side of the tent from outside of the tent. We both immediately began screaming hysterically. My parents came running, and all the while the scratching continued. My parents said it was surely just a bug, a tent string, or some vegetation, and got a flashlight to look at the exterior of the tent. There was nothing. They brushed down the exterior, shook the tent, took everything out of the tent and shook it. The noise continued. I was completely in pieces, so I went and slept in my parents' tent, and my father slept in the kid tent. My brother and father reported that the scratching continued all night long. Still puzzled and freaked out by this experience. Story 27. A couple of things happened to me and my housemate when we moved into the top apartment in an old building in Europe, right next to a forest known for witchcraft. The locals even have a witches' parade every year. It's a harmless bit of fun. The apartment was huge. 3 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, a study, 2 living rooms, a living space, a kitchen, 2 balconies. The bigger one was upstairs, across from a door to the attic that ran across the entire house. It was dark and full of a lot of old stuff, like from a century ago. We found porcelain, really old wooden furniture, and a doll neither of us wanted to touch. There were also some children's slippers and black and white pictures of a child from when the town still had carts pulled by oxen. It was a wonderful place to live, and the cheap rent made it wonderfuller, but both of us were mildly creeped out in the beginning. We used to hear stuff while in our rooms, like banging or footsteps, or like something had fallen on the carpets. My housemate would text me, "Did you hear that too?" But she soon stopped. She never wanted to talk about it either. I guess she didn't want to give it any power by acknowledging it. I clearly remember the first time she was out. It was winter, so it got dark by 4 p.m. I needed to grab groceries, so I left all the lights on to make myself feel better. I tried to look for my earphones for some music along the way, but I couldn't find them and left without them. When I returned, every single light in the house was switched off, except the one in my room. And I went to my room. My earphones were lying neatly rolled on top of my bed. A few other incidents took place while we lived there too, like the bulbs in the corridor, and only the corridor, dying with loud pops one by one. My housemate hearing something like a dog scratching at her door and texting me to let her sleep one evening while I was over at a friend's place. Me hearing a door loudly banging somewhere in the house while I was on the toilet, and the banging stopping immediately as soon as I flushed. It was like it didn't realize there was someone home. The house was weirdly cold too, but we lived there for a year without anything major happening. Story 28. When I was 13, I moved into my brother's bedroom, as it is an extension to the original house with an in-suite and is far larger than my old room. Originally, it was a tiny box room with the entrance to the attic, but was extended upstairs. The attic entrance is always open, with a permanent set of metal ladders angled up into it. Within a few weeks of moving in, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to see a figure staring down at me, with a white head like a skull and formless black body. It would slowly move down to the foot of my bed and stare at me until I moved, at which point it would sink into the floor. Just sleep paralysis, right? And I'd begged to move into the room and had just got it set up, so I wasn't going to leave. I didn't really talk about it to anyone. It gradually became less frequent over time. 8 years after this, my brother mentioned at a get-together that he used to have a sleep paralysis demon when he lived in that room in a half-joking, half-freaked-out way to other people when the topic of them came up. He described the exact same effing thing. Neither of us mentioned it to anybody else at the time it was happening, so we have no explanation for us both experiencing the same thing. Story 29. I, F27, was training to be a nurse. Here in Germany, you have to visit and practice a lot of places. I was working at a hospice, a place where the terminally ill patients can stay until their last day. I was there for 8 weeks and was in my last year of studying. I was doing a round, checking on everyone, making sure they're not in pain, needing any help, or just to talk. One patient, a woman who was there for days, had a different breathing, and I called her husband, who was in the group room. Don't know how to exactly describe it. She had her final breaths, while her husband was holding her hand. It was peaceful, and I know she was gone. At this moment, another patient made a call. We had phones, which would ring if someone requested a nurse. I excused myself and left her room. Deep breath and going to the patient who was calling. I entered and smiled. "How can I help you?" The man told me his guest would like to know where the exit was. I was a little confused because he hadn't had any visitors that day yet, so I asked, "What do you mean?" Maybe I just didn't see anyone because I was for half an hour with the dying patient. And he answered, "Well, this lady here, she wants to know where she could get out." I went pale, blood falling into my knees. I was shocked. I stuttered while opening the window. Here's the way to the balcony and right to the left. Down the stairs is the door. I'll get you some water. Left the room and was hardly breathing, leaning against the wall. Was standing there for 5 minutes. One of the nurses saw me and asked if I was okay. I told her what just happened. All she did was to smile and say, "Yes, that kind of stuff happens a lot here." A few hours later, I asked the man if the guest found the way out. Him. Yes, she did, and said thank you for everything. I had to process that for days, weeks, months. I still can't believe it, but I'm sure since then that we carry a soul. Also, some nasty, ghostly other things happened to me and my colleagues while working in an ICU. Story 30. A lot of weird stuff has happened to me in my life, so either I'm haunted by some trickster god type of crap, or stuff just tends to get strange naturally around me, and I'm too stupid to figure out what's going on. I've chosen 3 things that I absolutely can't explain, and had other people witness it. The first story takes place at a friend's apartment around 15 years ago. We were watching TV and just talking, and the subject turned to ghosts for some reason. I told her that I believed that there were something more in this world and that we didn't understand, but she just laughed and said that she had never believed in that kind of stuff and never would. She then shouted for the ghosts in the room to show themselves, just to F with me. She waited, smirking for a few seconds, and then we heard what sounded like a heartbeat, like rhythmic thumping. We looked around for a second and found the source almost immediately. It was my purse. It was laying on the table in front of us, pulsating like a heart. I grabbed it and emptied it, but we couldn't find anything that could have caused the weird heartbeat. The second story takes place around the same time, but in another friend's house. He told me on several occasions that he often heard footsteps in his living room, but I figured that it was probably creaky floors or pipes since it was an old house. But one night when my sister and I were at his place, we heard them as well. It was clear as day. Someone was walking, in heavy boots, it sounded like, from his kitchen into his living room and stopped right in front of the couch we were sitting on. The last story happened to me and my dad when I used to live with him and my sister. Me and my dad were sitting in the living room and watching a movie one night. My sister was in her room studying. When sat in the living room, you could see the hallway to the left that began at my sister's room, went past the living room and all the other rooms, and ended by the office where the family computer was. Both me and my dad saw my sister walk past her room to the office. We both turned and looked at her. 2 minutes later, we saw her again, walking the exact same direction. Me and my dad looked at each other, and he pointed out how weird it was that we never saw her go the other way back, and if he saw her again, he would ask her what she was doing. And sure enough, a few minutes later, she walked again from her room to the office. My dad called out for her and asked her if she was in the office. She then walked out of her room again and said that no, why did he ask? We have no idea who or what we saw that night, wandering the same route again and again, and my dad still considers it the weirdest thing he's ever experienced. Story 31. When I was a kid, I lived in this tiny 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and sister. For whatever reason, I used to sleep on the couch in the living room, wake up at 3 a.m. and watch anime while I get ready for school, and then sleep for a few more hours. I honestly don't remember why I used to do this. Anyways, one night I'm awake, it was probably around 2 or 3 a.m., and all of a sudden someone starts banging on the window and screaming. I mean, like, hysterically. It scared the absolute crap out of me. This went on for a good couple of minutes before it just stopped. The weirdest part is, it didn't wake up my mom, my sister, or even the neighbors. And when I asked if they heard anything, they told me no. Honestly, maybe it was just my imagination or some crazy old person, but I'll never know. Another incident that happened to me was when I was in middle school living in a house in the middle of nowhere with my family. It was a weekend, and of course I was sleeping in. My parents always hated that and would wake me up all the time. So when I heard this voice in my ear say, "Wake up," naturally, I wake up thinking it's my mom or something. But when I open my eyes, no one was there or in my room. So I thought, maybe they came in a few minutes ago and I'm just now waking up? Curious, I asked them if they tried to wake me up this morning. They both said no. To this day, I'm not sure if I was just hearing things or what, but it still freaks me out. Story 32. I was about 7 or 8, and I was at a housewarming party at my aunt and uncle's new house. It wasn't extravagant. It was a lower to middle class mobile home in South Carolina. Wasn't really a big party, just the family, some barbecue out back, red Solo cups, all boxes in the garage, and not even distributed to their proper rooms. The only things that were unpacked and where they should be was the furniture. So anyway, 2 of my cousins were there, and one of them had a friend over, and we were all playing together, some made-up fantasy game where we were pretending to be princesses or something. All of the adults were out back drinking, and I emphasize, there were only 4 people inside the house. Me, my 2 cousins, and the friend. The house was set up in such a way that the kitchen was the first room you walked into from the front door. Then there was the living room. Then past that was the hallway with the bathroom and bedrooms. I was in the living room on the couch because that was the princess's bedroom, and I was kind of just sitting there idle while the others got snacks. With no warnings or no other sounds, every single one of us hears a female voice let out an ear-piercing, gut-wrenching, overall horrifying scream in the bathroom. It was clear as day, and it was so loud and sudden that it made me jump, as the living room was right next to the hallway. My cousins and their friend run out from the kitchen and look at me sitting there, and then we all run from the living room into the bathroom. Not a single person is in there, and nothing is displaced because there wasn't anything unpacked anyway except the toilet paper. We turned back around to see about 3 adults coming in from the back door because they had heard it too, coming from inside, so it wasn't any of them. What gets me about it is this. We have all since entertained the idea that it was a prank no one has fessed up to yet, but in order for it to have been a corporeal being, they would have had to somehow get into the bathroom without me seeing them from the couch, screamed, ran out of the bathroom to either the back door, without any of the 4 kids in the living room seeing, or out a window in one of the bedrooms. All of the bedroom windows were locked from the inside, so if they escaped that way, someone would have had to lock it and go out the back door, which again we would have seen. One of the creepiest things that's happened to me. And before you cry, speaker hidden somewhere, that was one of the first things that my uncle checked for when he ran inside and was told by us that none of us had done it. Me and my cousins think it's either something supernatural or something that the adults did. And all of the adults that were there think that one of us screamed and lied about it because we were all in the bathroom when they came in. Either way, the mood at the party was killed really fast after that. Everyone was confused and a little on edge, and there wasn't any of that self-satisfied undertone that someone who just played a really good practical joke would have been showing. It was a pretty blood-curdling sound. Story 33. My last year at uni, I lived in a 4-bedroom house with a ground floor, then 2 floors with 2 bedrooms each. My friends had the first floor bedrooms. I was on the second floor, and the bedroom next to me was empty because the guy who had rented it was staying with his girlfriend. I don't think he ever slept there. My bedroom and his had small crawl space cupboards in the corners. I come home from uni one day to find my friends discussing noises sounding like footsteps that they've heard from my floor at night when I was asleep. I laugh because apparently these noises are loud and I've heard nothing. Because I don't believe them, I offer to go look at the crawl spaces. We go upstairs. I open the door of the empty room, and right as I open the door to the crawl space in the other corner of the room slams shut. We freak out. There's no reason for that door to have been open in the first place, so we grab kitchen knives, hole up in one of their rooms, and wait for a friend to come back and check the cupboards and attic. We never found out what those noises were, but it was the scariest thing that happened the whole year we were there. Story 34. A ghost saved my life in a haunted old Shakespearean theater by telling me that a plank that edged along a wall, which was the only way to get to the furthest corner of the building, 60 feet above the stage, was missing a section, and warned me that I would die. 1985. I had worked there all summer when I was 17 and had never seen this guy before. I had landed a cool job as a stage operations crew the summer after high school and worked the upper theater high above the stage, on the catwalks. I was working in a far corner of a theater's rafters through my lunch break so I could leave early that day, and was asked to walk off the catwalk, cross a wooden plank, and drop a rope down, and pull up a larger rope to tie off on the rafters. We were getting ready for the season, and slowly stringing lights and scenery to the drops that were bars on pulleys and counterweights. As I left the decently made catwalk, I stepped onto a plank and couldn't see the middle of the building, but could see a plank rising upward on the other side of the darkness. Okay, it must hit a platform there at the bottom and go up again, I thought. I walked 4 to 5 steps down into a very dimly lit part of the rafters on the plank when a man stopped me. Turn around slowly. The plank is missing. No light. Get light. Fine, I said in a sarcastic teenage voice. I turned around and got back on the catwalk, walked to the ladder and climbed down to the stage to get a flashlight. My boss asked, "Why are you down here?" "I need a light, and your guy said a plank was missing and to get a light." "What guy? You're the only one up there." "The old guy with the beard and wool cap." My boss, who headed the technical/carpenter/electrical part of the theater, was in his late 60s and had worked in that theater for nearly 40 years. He looked amused at first, laughing at me, asking, "How'd you know about that?" "Know about what?" "I came down for a flashlight so I could see." "You're serious? You saw him?" "It must have been 1954, and a rigger fell from the rafters and died. He fell all the way to the stage. I think his name was John. In 74, my assistant made up a story about talking to him, but back then we were all smoking something." "What are you on?" "Nothing. Come with me. Let's see if it's missing." So he did. Sure enough, the plank was missing. There was a plank I was on, a platform, nothing, and a platform with a plank from that platform to the upper corner of the building. From my vantage point, it looked like a plank, platform, plank, platform, plank. In the dust along the plank were my footprints leading right to the edge. One more step and I would have fallen to the stage. Below us was a thick fabric curtain that separated the stage from the rafters, blocking light from below. In the horizontal folds of the curtain, a wool cap. To this day, I've not stepped back into that theater. Why not? At least the ghost is friendly, right? I mean, literally saved your life. Come on. Story 35. I don't think I've ever talked about this to anyone because it still hurts to think about it. But yeah, I really wanted to share this here. Also, this is quite a long one. I had this neighbor who was around 30, and he was such a sweet guy. Let's say his name was Adam. I felt like he was the kind of older brother I have always wished for. He was an all-rounder, gym freak, good at singing and playing every possible instrument, dance, sports, cooking, etc. He used to take me and my younger brother to the beach wherever possible. So this incident took place 3 days before my 14th birthday. It was on my way to school in the morning when this absurd scene flashed in front of my eyes. It was him getting into an accident and dying. It felt so real, I almost wanted to cry, but then I told myself maybe it's because I had watched a movie with the character dying the previous night. I continued with the day, and it was almost 8 p.m. when my parents got a call from someone. I could see their face change expressions. Once the call ended, they said they needed to go somewhere and would be back in a while. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I felt that something wasn't right. Next morning, I woke up to the worst news of my life. Adam was no more. Apparently, he met with a major accident the previous night and died on the spot. I don't know how to react because a few hours before he died, I did have a bad feeling. For days, I couldn't even sleep, and I blamed myself because I felt like maybe I could have warned him about it, and maybe he would still be alive. It's been almost 7 years since this incident took place, but every time I think about it, my heart aches and I still wish he was alive. I still can't figure out why I had that sort of a feeling hours before it actually happened, and it scares me. Story 36. So, my brother, myself, and our friend were driving through Vermont, heading to a cabin to go snowboarding for the week. I was sitting passenger in my brother's car when I noticed a bright red light. It's night in the sky. It was coming from deep in the woods, but was shining in a huge dome shape. The light seemed to be restricted to the dome. The light did not seem to travel far, but it was very bright. We were so baffled, we pulled over at this small gas station on the road to get a better look. There were about 6 other people who seemed to live there also looking at the light. They were telling us there was no buildings or factories out there whatsoever. As our conversation continued, the light seemed to diminish, but then almost imploded on itself and burst out with a huge white light that lit up the sky and surrounding area. Then, about 10-ish seconds after this change, a huge wind gust came at us from the direction of the light. I'd say it was about 15 to 25 mph winds. I hike and just making comparisons to the wind on mountains. Then the light just began to fade away, so we hopped in our cars and kept going. The light didn't fully diminish for about 10 minutes. Craziest crap ever. Story 37. I was in 9th grade and my friend, Donna, invited me to accompany her and her parents to a barbecue at the Up North vacation home. It's a Michigan thing, of one of her relatives. I'd never been there before, had never met these aunts, uncles, and cousins. There was a badminton net set up on the property, and since Donna and I had recently had a badminton unit in gym class, we went into the storage unit / pole barn to search out the rackets and shuttlecocks. At one point, while she was digging through stacks of stuff, she commented something like, "I think Cousin Karen's husband is kinda creepy." The thing was, I looked directly at Donna and spoke that line completely in unison with her. I'd had a very sudden flash, as if I'd been in this exact place in this situation before, and I knew what she was going to say as soon as she paused and looked up at me. Donna, of course, was stunned and asked me how I knew she was going to say that. "Deja vu," I replied, still trying to understand it myself. She was unfamiliar with the term other than the literal translation. "Already seen?" she asked. I tried to explain that I didn't know if I'd seen this scenario in a dream or what, but she was weirded out by it, as was I. Story 38. Long one, and it'll sound like bullcrap. I went to a boarding school, as my dad was in the military, and for a few years he was moved around way more than the normal every 3 years. It was full of other kids in that sort of situation, so it was a bit rougher than what people usually think of when they hear boarding school. There was a lot of bullying and fighting. Anyway, we would also make up stupid ghost stories to scare our dorm mates. One of them was about this former pupil called Peter who went crazy and killed the other kids in his dorm and a teacher before running away. There were woods nearby and a few caves. It was said that he lived in one of them and would sneak back into the school to steal food and clothes from dorms. There used to be a challenge to go to the caves near dark and run into the largest one and touch a stone outcropping that was just before the cave took a turn off to the side. Hardly anyone had the balls to do it. One day, me and some of my friends were messing about near the caves. I was playing with one of my toys that I brought to the school. It was a slightly repainted G.I. Joe Salvo figure with a new head I'd swapped in because I didn't like him bald. Some of the kids who used to give us a hard time sort of snuck up on us and gave us the usual beating. Then one of them threw my toy into the cave, laughing at how sneaky Pete would have fun with it. After they left, I tried to go in and find it, but couldn't, and I ended up getting freaked out. This ate away at me for weeks, so I planned my revenge. The bullies would usually always go to the cave after dinner to challenge a few kids to go in to prove they were cool. I snuck away from dinner early and got changed into all black clothing and a ski mask. I waited until I could hear the kids coming, then snuck into the cave, right to the back behind the stone and waited. They stood outside for a while, but eventually one of the bullies tried to prove how tough he was by going to touch the stone. I waited till he got real close, then jumped out and yelled. Everyone started screaming and running in all directions. I felt pretty good. Strangely, my revenge had overcame any fear I had. I didn't really think that I was there in the cave, alone in the dark. Anyway, the scary bit is on the way back. I put my hand in my pocket and found my G.I. Joe. It chilled me to the core. Now I know that I probably just found it in there and subconsciously put it away while I was focused on the scare, but I have no memory of it, and my clothes were different. It still gives me the creeps. Story 39. I lived on a 600-acre farm in Arkansas. Absolutely no one around for miles and miles and miles. Was out feeding the animals after getting home late one night. Just was finishing up and taking the buckets back to the barn. As I was locking up the feeding barn, we had a herding dog. It was a corgi. It just was going absolutely nuts and running into the woods. So I instantly went to investigate to make sure that the animals would be all right. Had a handheld spotlight, shining it into the woods. Saw nothing. The dog was just going absolutely nuts still, and finally I see him running between these trees towards this black splotch. Was somewhat humanoid shaped, but it went in at it and the things just seemed to absorb the light. I've never seen anything like it. Closest would be like an opaque stone, how it doesn't reflect the light, but just kind of nullifies it. Regardless, the dog suddenly was tossed up over my head, over the electric fence, which is above 6 foot in height and at least 9 feet back towards the fence. I absolutely booked it back to the house to get the shotgun, and when I came back, the dogs were still barking, but the thing was gone. So I shot the shotgun in an attempt to scare whatever it was away, and it seemed to have worked. Didn't see it again. Dogs all come back to the house, feed and water them, give them all the good boy pets for protecting the animals. Now, here's the part that made it mega hard to cope with, and it really upset me. The next day, that specific dog who chased in after whatever this was wound up dead with its neck snapped completely backwards on the edge of the woods. I was so in shock and grief at the time that I didn't really think about it, but I still to this day have no idea what that was, and the thought of it just makes me sick to my stomach. Story 40. When I was 14, I played on a Ouija board with a friend. The spirit came through was named Seth. I was really into Egyptian mythology, so I naturally thought of Set. I may have asked a few things before my friend got scared/bored and we stopped. At 18, I just aged out of foster care and was really lost in life. I had gone to the local library and was looking through the metaphysical section and saw a book called Seth Speaks about a spirit named Seth who's channeled by a woman named Jane Roberts who talks about reality, spirituality, and metaphysical topics. I got it and another one of his books. It immediately made me feel like it was one and the same. That connection saved me from taking my life a few times, and I feel it saved me from making fatal decisions while being homeless and on hard drugs most of my 20s. At 43, I finally got sober and had a revelation about Seth. I was 2 years sober and had one of his main teachings come screaming through my head. You create your own reality. Sober for a few years, lost 200 pounds, got off disability and promoted at work, ended a 30-year depression, changed my life. Story 41. Okay, so I've posted this on sleep paralysis subreddit, but haven't had much response. It's my only explanation, which makes remote sense of it all. Happened a long time ago, but I just now remembered it. I've shared this story to a friend only once and never spoke of it again, because logic tells me my mind was hallucinating and it was probably just sleep paralysis, even though it still freaks me out. Story. I was 12 or 13. My family goes to Vietnam every year or other year since I was young, and we would stay at a random family member's house to save money from hotel costs. My family is huge. Anyway, location this time is at my uncle/aunt's place in District 2. I'm just a kid, so I share a bedroom with my cousins, aunt and uncle, while my mom, dad, and brother share another room next door. These bedrooms are upstairs. I randomly wake up in the middle of the night, and this never happens. I'm usually pretty good about not drinking too much water to need to pee, but just enough to sleep and not be thirsty. But when I woke up, I hear a very weird vibrating humming noise outside, and at first I figured it was just someone coming home late from work/partying and is on their moped and won't turn off their engine. However, the sound seems to be coming from above and not below, and the next thing I see is a giant flash of light going across the balcony right outside our bedroom. Everyone is dead asleep. My uncle is still snoring super loud and everything. I kind of freak out and close my eyes and just try and fall back asleep. But of course, my heart is pumping with what feels like adrenaline. Next, I feel/sense two entities standing next to me. To my right, and the next moment, my body lifts up off the bed. I can feel my sheets kind of just flop over and hanging off my feet due to gravity. I can now also hear a new humming noise, and it's like I'm on a scanner. It goes up and down my body like an MRI machine. There's definitely a light and warm feeling going up and down as well. I'm, of course, still freaking out. I want to open my eyes, but I'm too scared to. Next, I feel one of them pressing down on my belly. The first time it felt like a squish, just straight down into my belly. About equivalent of something weighing 5 pounds, super light, could have been a finger or a stick. I'm thinking WTF, WTF, WTF at this point and still freaking out. My heart is racing like crazy. Then, the second time they poked me there, it went super hard. Definitely felt like a sharp stick/pipe pushing down on me with the force of intending to pierce through. I'm now trying to scream and open my eyes, but my eyes are now locked shut. I can't open them, and my scream sounded muffled, like I'm screaming into a pillow, and the pillow has a vacuum abyss that returns no echo. I try again and again to move any part of my body, to scream and make some kind of noise, but all in vain. This goes on for a solid 15 seconds of excruciating pain, until one of my cousins turns in their sleep. I can hear our bed creak a bit, and I'm returned back to the bed softly with the force of my belly releasing. As soon as my back hit the bed again, I open my eyes to see these entities I sense next to me, but they're gone. And the next thing I see when I sit up is that same flash of light, but disappearing, along with that mysterious humming sound going off in the distance. I look around the room for any signs of anyone noticing anything at all. My uncle is still snoring loud as ever, and everyone else is also still sleeping. I'm now in a sweat, heart still racing. I stayed up for the rest of that night. Writing this story, I'm shaking remembering it very vividly, like it just happened. Someone please tell me I just experienced a random case of sleep paralysis, please. LOL. So OP, if you're listening to this rehash of your own story, yeah, let me tell you that you experienced a random case of sleep paralysis. As you requested. Hope you feel better now. It's a nice story, though. Story 42. Long post, so bear with me. Back in high school, I want to say it was my sophomore year, 10th grade, my friends and I used to sneak out of our parents' house late at night, and we used to meet up at the campus and vandalize, smoke, F around, just stupid troubled teen things. Well, one night, we met up at the school to smoke and hang out. During our smoke session, we noticed a very random and bizarre-looking light appear in the baseball dugout next to us. We were smoking in the baseball field dugout. At first, we thought maybe it was a school janitor or guard working late, but we weren't too worried by that thought. We kept our eyes on it as it started moving out of the dugout and towards ours. Then it finally appeared in the center of the field, in the center of all the plates, where even at night it was fully visible due to the lights. But we saw nothing, just the light we first noticed, which happened to become brighter as it got closer. We saw no body or silhouette of any kind holding this light. It appeared to be floating. Once I realized that it was just a floating light, I turned to my friends, only to realize that they ran off without me. That's when I decided to grab all the stuff they left behind, throw it into my backpack, and run. As I got a bit of distance from it, I looked back only to see that it had ran through the 2 fences we had to climb over. That's when I really started crapping my pants. So I started sprinting towards my friends, and we ended up running for about half a mile before we lost it in a neighborhood that one of my friends in our friend group had lived in. We hopped his backyard gate to lose whatever was chasing us in the middle of the night. To this day, we don't know what the light was. I've only seen it one other time at the same school while I was taking a run on the track it had. It was definitely the creepiest thing any of my friends and I have experienced, and we're the type to have played with Ouija boards, amateur ghost hunting, and things of that sort. Nothing ever scared us as bad as this thing. Story 43. For the first year and a half of college, I worked the evening shift, 3 to 11, in a small town hotel that was ran by my best friend's mom. The laundry room was connected to the main office, and since it came out into the middle of the hallway, we usually used it as a shortcut if we were going to check on a guest's room. Everybody would leave by 8 p.m., and the evening shift would work the last few hours alone. We primarily served week-long business days, so it was pretty quiet. My first day working alone, a housekeeper was teasing me about a ghost that haunted the hotel. I laughed it off. That night, when I was alone, I used the laundry room as a shortcut. I was halfway through the laundry room when all of the washing machines and dryers kicked on at the same time. I flew out of the room. I never really mentioned it to anybody, and in the back of my mind, I told myself that maybe everything had been set on a timer or something. I never had any more issues until a year and a half later, on my last day of working there. Earlier in the week, I had an unsettling experience with a guest. He was embarrassed to borrow a plunger. He returned it by coming in through the unsecured laundry room, came all the way into the back office, and left the plunger in the middle of the room. He intentionally came in very quietly and never announced he was in the office or anything. I just turned the corner from the front desk and found the plunger in the middle of the room. Due to that, I had shut the door between the laundry room and the office. It was my last hour of work, and I suddenly heard what sounded like 3 drunk men arguing in the laundry room on the other side of the door. It was so loud, and I kept hearing the clink of beer bottles, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. I called my best friend, who worked the night shift and was the manager's son. He could hear the voices arguing through the phone, too. The situation felt so surreal, and even though I objectively knew it was a dumb idea, I opened the door to tell the guys to go to bed. As soon as I opened the door, the voices stopped and the room was completely empty. I blew it off, but it was so weird that my first and last day involved such strange experiences. Story 44. Not my story, but I stumbled upon it several years ago, and it's really stuck with me ever since. Here's the original post, but I'll copy it here. Howdy, Reddit. My husband stumbled onto this sub and thought it would be a great place to share our story. I'm using a throwaway because we don't know what people close to us would think. This is the first time we've talked about this with anyone other than each other. I've read through some of the stories here, and I hope ours fits here too. I'd like to preface this by saying that neither my husband nor I do any sort of drugs, suffer from mental illness, or abuse alcohol. We drink occasionally, but had not been drinking this night. It happened about 8 months ago. We lived in a small apartment with our 2 young children and our dog while we saved up for a down payment on a home. It was a typical Monday night around 7 p.m. We had just cleaned up after dinner. My husband was surfing the web, and I was relaxing on the couch. I was reading the back of the cake mix, trying to decide if I had time to bake it, let it cool, frost it, and eat it before I needed to be in bed. My husband was watching a video on the internet. He said something funny about it, and we both laughed. Then, bam! I woke up, face down in bed. My clock read 8 o'clock exactly. My alarm hadn't been turned on. I was very confused and could smell the strong scent of coconut. I sat up and looked at my husband, who was also just waking up. He looked at me with a really confused look, and we both jumped out of bed and ran to our kids' room. They were in bed asleep. We went into the living room, and the second our dog saw us, she started whimpering and sort of army crawling towards us. It was such unusual behavior for her. I had never seen her act that way before, and have never since. Nothing looked out of order in our apartment aside from one small detail. The cake mix I had been looking at that night was gone. I searched everywhere for that cake mix and never found it. Another odd detail from that day is that we were all dressed in our pajamas when we woke up, except my youngest. He was in the jeans and t-shirt he had been wearing the night before. Neither my husband nor I have ever put him to bed like that. Neither of us have any memory of getting into our pajamas or anything else after laughing at the comment he made on the video. We, already late for work, both called in sick that day. We spent the day talking about it and trying to make sense of it. At some point that day, he asked me if I had smelled coconut when I woke up. We never found the source of the smell. To this day, I can't look at a cake mix or smell coconut without feeling a little anxious and sick. TLDR. Just bake the cake. Story 45. Okay, this turned into a long one, and it's not exactly unexplained. A few years ago, I was volunteering with some friends in a remote region of Tanzania. We were there to teach English, but it was total voluntourism. Very few people in the region spoke English because it was completely unnecessary. The type of charity work someone thought up in a boardroom 1,000 miles away. Anyway, we were staying in this old hotel, up on the top floor, maybe like 6th floor. We chose the top floor for the views, but it also gave us privacy. The hotel was way oversized for the small town it was in. We were more or less the only people staying there. There were probably 20 rooms to a floor, and it was all very open. On each floor, a central tiled staircase opened straight into a lobby, with the rooms accessed via various hallways. We had 2 rooms, with 2 of us in each. The rooms were basic but clean, all tiled. There was also an open window above each door so we could shout to our friends staying in the room next door. We'd been there a couple months and got used to having the place to ourselves. No one ever came up beyond the ground floor except the maids on occasion. One of the quietest places I've ever slept. That was until one night. I woke up to see my friend sat bolt upright. We could hear someone running on the stairs a few floors below. The slapping of their feet on the tiles echoed up the staircase as they ran. Then they started screaming. It was a woman's scream, and it was guttural, absolutely raw and animalistic. It was a while ago, but I can still hear it clearly. She eventually reaches our floor and starts banging on doors. She's still screaming. She's screaming for help and coming down our corridor. She sounds terrified. By this time I was up, had grabbed a knife we'd bought to cut fruit, Lord knows what I thought I was going to do with it, and was heading for the door. Just as I reach it, my friend grabs me and drags me back. He gestures for me to stay quiet. I would trust this guy with my life, so I do as I'm told. We stand there in silence in the dark. The woman reaches our thin wooden door. She's slapping on it and screaming out for help. We can hear her so clearly because of the open window above. She's also just a couple of feet away. She's crying out and sobbing, scratching at the door. My friend and I stand in silence just on the other side. We're frozen. Honest to God, I was terrified. After about 10 minutes, we hear her receding down the corridor, no longer crying out so loudly. We hear other people's voices on the stairs and then nothing, as the place falls silent again. I turn to my friend, who looks me dead in the eye. Calmly, he explains. She was shouting in English, mate, all the way. She knew we were here. She knew what door to come to. She also wasn't alone. I heard footsteps on the floor before you woke up. They were trying to get that door open so they could rob us. Had you opened that door, they would have done so. Suddenly, I felt a bit ridiculous with my little fruit knife. Just sat in stunned silence. It made sense. Before long, my friend went back to sleep and I was left with my thoughts. To this day, I have no idea if my friend was right. It still sits with me, whether we could have helped someone that night. But my gut tells me my friend was right. He usually is, but man, when I think back to how close I came to opening that door, we spoke to the manager and the staff the next day. None of them had any idea what we were talking about. They were very apologetic though, and even set up a security watch for the rest of our stay. Story 46. I had a weird feeling about my car. No lights were on or anything, but something inexplicably felt off. It was a light drizzle, around 8 p.m., and I was driving from Maryland to North Carolina. I stopped at a gas station, checked all my tires, and listened for anything amiss. Rain made that difficult to hear if anything was. I called my best friend, told her I had an eerie feeling, and started to make an appointment with my car shop in Chapel Hill, North Carolina for the next day by texting a dad I babysit for, the owner, asking if I could bring it in. 10 minutes later, my tire popped and my car spun out within 2 to 3 seconds going 80 mph. I went 20 to 30 yards into the tree line in the median instead of under the tractor trailer to my right. Hit trees at every angle, and then grabbed my keys, backpack, and dog and climbed out of the passenger seat to get out. My car was effed. The final tree hit my driver's side and blocked me, and was relatively unscathed, apart from some glass shards and PTSD, after seconds before fully mentally accepting death. Checking my phone after, waiting for the ambulance and police to get there, the dad texts back asking what time I want to come in. I texted him back, JK, my car is totaled. IDK why I'm alive. IDK why I felt like I knew it. I truly think I'm alive because I decided to stop and at least try to diagnose the problem versus ignoring it and continuing. It's creepy, and I trust my intuition over everything, and always have, but this one F's with me. Story 47. I swear everything in this story is true. I was going through some old pics and this one cropped up. It was summer 1975, and we visited the Magic Kingdom on a weekend. Back in those days, Disney was working the ticket system. You paid to get in the park, and at the same window, you bought tickets to be used within the park. The tickets were designated A through E, with an E ticket being for the best rides in the park. As I recall, It's a Small World was an A ticket ride, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was a C ticket ride, and much later, Space Mountain would be an E ticket ride. In our group was Dad, Mom, my sister Kim, and I. We had a great day and documented the trip with our Polaroid SX70. A word about how our family worked. Dad was the photographer, period. No one ever used the camera except for him. However, I, age 13, took the underdeveloped photos and fanned them until they developed. I was the man. If you do not remember how these cameras worked, please Google it. We thought they were great. After lunch, we were walking by the Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ride, and I wanted to go on it. I had my e-ticket, but Dad stopped me short. He was, as usual, short and sharp. Son, think for a minute. That ride submerges underwater. We're not going on it. Think for a minute. I heard that come out of his mouth at least 500 times in my life. Why, Dad? What if it breaks while we're submerged? Me, derisively. Okay, right, Dad. Son, when it comes to machines, it's an imperfect world. Things break all the time. What if the mechanic for that ride had a bad day yesterday? We're not going underwater in that thing. And that was that. I was a bit crestfallen, and Dad tried to throw me a bone. He offered to take a picture of a Nautilus as it cruised by, so I was mollified. After all, it was a chance to fan an undeveloped photo. Mom and Kim dropped back, and Dad went to the rail. We watched as he bent over the rail facing the lagoon and snapped a shot of a submarine as it traveled by on its underwater rail. Out popped the white photo with a whir and a click, and he handed it to me to fan. I did so, and we walked on, me contentedly fanning another photo. In a moment, I looked at the developed photo, and for a moment, I did not understand what I was looking at. I called Dad over and showed him. In the photo was the lagoon, the Nautilus, the black area on the right, and the back of my father's head. Wait, what? The back of my dad's head was in the picture? Impossible. He leaned over the rail and snapped the shot. We watched him do it. There should have only been the sub and the lagoon in the frame. It was as if I held the camera over my head behind him and snapped a picture, but that had not happened. Remember, only Dad was the photographer. No exceptions. I watched Dad take the photo while leaning over the rail. So did Mom. It was genuinely an image which could not exist. Dad looked at the photo and said, "Well, kiddoski, told you we weren't going on that ride." Kiddoski was his nickname for me at times. Dad was a product of his era, early adulthood in the 1940s. Show no weakness. He appeared to shrug it off, but years later, Mom would tell me that he later broke down and cried in front of her and asked what it could have possibly meant. Was it a message about his mortality? He would die 6 years later of mesothelioma, but I never connected the two incidents in my heart. After all, we all have a shelf life. We kept the photo, and I have scanned it. Story 48. I live in a relatively rural area. 5 minutes up the road from me is all farmland and cattle pastures. There is a lake that we overlook, and a hill further behind us. Up on that higher hill, there have been stories of weird happenings for decades. Figures on the side of the road that vanish, people offering rides to people only for the person to disappear into thin air halfway through their response. Even one story of a pregnant woman who was kidnapped and later found walking on the road trying to get to a hospital. Those stories have been passed around in our community since about the late 1950s. Everybody kind of knows not to drive on that road late at night, but it has a much higher speed limit than my road and a convenient cut-through to halfway down my road. Using the cut-through cuts the time to get from the main road to my house by a full 5 minutes or so. And I was tired one night. I'm driving along, alone in my truck. It's a warm summer night. I've got the windows rolled down, and I'm bopping to some kind of country song. Can't remember which one, but I know it was Glenn Campbell. On the side of the road is a very tall figure, probably near 6'6", 200 centimeters, wearing a baggy black hoodie. I slow down and drop the left window, offer him a ride in the bed of the truck if he needs to go down the road a bit. He's handsome, chiseled jaw, patchy black beard, brown eyes, and very pale white skin. He drops the hood to make better eye contact and doesn't so much smile as his face goes less frowny. "No, sir, that's all right. I prefer this kind of ambiance. Keeps my mind how it should be." I make sure he's certain, mainly out of politeness. The road has harsh, very rocky sides, and I don't want him slipping because it had rained earlier in the day. He smiles a bit, but it's then that I remember what I've heard about this road. Something seems off. He smiles fine, nothing weird. Teeth are a bit crooked, but they're clean and white. "Really, sir, I appreciate the offer. You're awful kind." He speaks with a southern accent, kind of like my cousins, but not more Tennessee than their Raleigh. He rolls his L noises and speaks slowly. "You have a good night." I nod and roll up the window, and turn the music back up. As I'm pulling away, I check in the side view mirror. He's still casually walking, maybe a bit fast because of the length of his legs, but it's still a walk. I get a bit of the way down the road, cruising at about 45 or so, and a minute later I look in the mirror. He's the same distance from me. He's running now, and keeping the same distance from my truck, which is moving at 45 miles per hour. I'm freaking the F out naturally, and it's as I look harder into the mirror that I notice something is weird. He's got the hood back up, but I can still see his eyes. They're green, reflective green, like a dog's. I floor it, and he stops running after me, slowing down his steps, and I hear his laughter's echoes all the way down the hill of the cut-through to my home. I sat up the entire night and had every door locked and a bat in my hands. I did not sleep until about 2 days later when my parents got worried and drove me to my godmother's house, and her husband stayed up with a shotgun pointed at the door to keep me calm. His laughter was in my nightmares. Story 49. I used to get deja vu a lot as a child. Most times it was just a weird feeling of living in a memory, but there are 2 times where I actually felt like I could predict, or did predict, the future. One time I had a dream of driving on a country road I'd never been on before. A few days later, I drove down that exact same road as the one in my dream. Another time I was having a conversation with my brother and felt like I had that exact conversation before. I could also remember 5 to 10 seconds ahead of time, so I was completing sentences for my brother and he was freaking out, lol. One other thing kind of unrelated. One time I had this dream where I got up to use the bathroom. When I got out, there was a demon standing in the doorway with bright golden eyes. I told my brother about this dream, but when I got to the part about the demon, he finished my thought for me and said, "With golden eyes?" Turns out he had the exact same dream as me. Edit. One other weird dream I thought of. I remember waking up and my carotid artery in my neck felt a little weird. Then it started thumping and beating more and more violently until it felt like it was about to burst. I remember being so sure I would die and trying to call out to my parents but couldn't. As soon as I died, I woke up for real. What's weird is that this is by far the most realistic dream I've ever had. Like all the fight or flight hormones or whatever they're called was rushing through my body as if it was real, and I felt what it was like to truly panic. But none of it was real. It was probably just sleep paralysis, but I've had that many times since, and I've never experienced anything like that again. Story 50. I went to UVA at the same time that Morgan Harrington disappeared, which was my second year there, aka sophomore year. Sadly to say, because she wasn't a student, she was in town for a Metallica concert, her death was salacious but didn't really strike fear into the student body like it did when Hannah Graham would go missing 5 years later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, about a week or so after Morgan's death in 2009, me and my guy friend were at a grocery store right outside of campus getting snacks around 10 p.m. Bus service had ended, so we decided to use a cab service UVA had set up to make sure students had access to rides in case they were drunk or just needed transpo. UVA pays the bill up front and charges you later. So we get into this guy's cab and he immediately starts bringing up Morgan's disappearance. This wasn't so strange because everyone was talking about it. It was national news, but I'm an introvert with a good memory, so I remember just about every conversation over 3 minutes long I've ever had, especially with strangers. He starts talking about police theories about the case, and my friend, who went on to get a master's in gothic horror, starts talking about how some people thought a cult was involved. Basically speculative BS. In addition to that, I remember the guy looking at me through the rearview mirror. I won't say I never forget a face, but this conversation was so macabre that his stuck with me, even years later. Anyway, he dropped us off and we made it home safe. Fast forward 5 years. I'm in grad school 1,000 miles away, and Hannah Graham's disappearance is national news. Fortunately, in this case, they have video surveillance. You can see her walking away with a big African-American guy with dreadlocks. They get an ID and his face is on the news everywhere. I don't recognize him. They eventually catch this guy in Texas, just an hour or so away from where I was in school at the time. As days go by, they're profiling this guy, and his DNA matches samples found on Morgan's remains, found 3 months after her disappearance in 2009. A picture comes up on the screen of what he looked like 5 years before, and my heart stops. There are no dreadlocks. His hair is clean cut. He's about 40 pounds lighter and his beard is short. He is, I'm 97% certain, the same man who drove us home that night. He lured both Morgan and Hannah with his cab. Every now and then, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't been with my male friend that night. I'm pretty sure it was his idea to go out so late, but still. Or what if he had been a girl? Would I have made it home okay? P.S. I think this guy likely killed more people. In particular, there was a trans teenager, a townie, that went missing before Morgan who, to my knowledge, was never found. It got almost no news coverage, even locally. Okay, so this is definitely a sick story, and I don't want to make light of that by any means, but one line from this that just kind of stuck out to me was that OP's friend majored or got a master's in gothic horror and had no idea that that was a majored, let alone something that you could pursue an advanced degree in. Gothic horror. What can you do with that? Gotta look that up. Story 51. Well, this will be my very first Reddit post, but I found this thread and it feels like my stories would fit in perfectly. About 10 years ago, I was dating my ex who had very strict and extremely religious parents. The only way we could meet up or to have some private time was by her sneaking out of her window in the middle of the night. I usually met her halfway because she was scared. So this one night she called me and told me she's on her way, which was weird since we never agreed on meeting that night. To be honest, I did not really think of it as being weird or anything. Also, it was the beginning of our relationship, so I was pretty excited to see her. Now for the creepy part. The first thing that happened is that my cat at the time was blocking my door, like really trying not to let me pass. I ignored it and went downstairs to put on my shoes. My cat was meowing and following me the whole way. I put my keys on the shoe shelf and put my shoes on, just to see that my keys had vanished. I started searching for them literally everywhere, all while my cat was really getting on my nerves with that excessive meowing. 5 minutes go by and I get another call from her telling me that she already arrived and is waiting outside. I was kind of surprised how she made it to my place that fast. I told her I lost my keys and that we can just keep chatting until I find them. She got impatient really quick and at some point started screaming at me, telling me to, quote, open that effing door. All while my cat is still just going crazy. In the last few seconds, I could swear her voice changed a little and she just screamed before hanging up the phone. I was really stressing because I had no idea WTF was happening. My keys vanished, my cat went crazy, and my girlfriend was screaming at me on the phone. After she hung up the phone, I turned around just to see that my keys were exactly where I left them. I opened the door, went outside searching for her. She was nowhere to be found. I went back inside thinking she got pissed and just left. I picked up my phone and called her again. She picked up the phone and I asked her where she went and that I found the keys. She told me that she did not call me that night and never left the house. To this day, this whole scene just F's with my head. Never figured out what had happened. Story 52. I had just moved into a pub that was like 500 years old. I was 12. Hertfordshire, England. Creepy effing place, especially the cellar, which had a trap door leading into the flat above. Rumor has it there was a famous highwayman that used to F at the place, but who knows? Lots of things used to happen, like your typical haunted pub stuff. Broken glasses, moving chairs, etc. But one particular moment stood out more than any. It was about the third or fourth week living there with my family. I had a nice big room, which was much bigger than my previous room, so I was happy. I had an old box TV that was about 40 inches square, before the days of flat screen, and my Xbox plugged in and sitting on top of said television. I hadn't got a bed frame at this point, but I had a mattress on the floor where my bed would be, a good 8 feet away from my TV. Suddenly, the Xbox comes flying off the top of the TV and lands on my feet on my bed. Instant crap pants activate. Couldn't stay in that place for a few weeks after that. Eventually, thought F the ghost and came back. Story 53. I'm pretty sure you saw a robber. I was literally robbed close to Halloween like that. So this guy came into my dollar store and I'm sitting behind my register making minimum wage, totally not giving an F about anything and eating beef jerky. My boss is at the register across from mine and we're just bullcrapping one another. I see the masked dude enter and start laughing at this dude, and I asked him why he's in a mask. He says, "I'm here to rob you," then pulls out this giant effing Bowie knife and walks over towards me. Immediately, I open my register, still chewing, and this dude is jabbing at me with his knife as I've got a mouth full of beef jerky trying not to get jabbed by this jabroni. At this point, I'm starting to get a little concerned about that knife, and I decided to lift the whole effing register and slam it down onto the counter so that the mother effer can take the bills himself, because I'm not about to stick my body or hands any closer to that knife. I swallowed my beef jerky as I'm watching this guy slowly pick through the money in my register, taking my 2 20s and a $5 bill and leaving the ones for some reason. Meanwhile, I'm getting jabbed at, and my manager across from me this whole time has a drawer full of cash, stuffed with about $1,000 deposit from the previous night that hadn't been dropped off at the bank yet. It was early in the morning and we really didn't care about anything. This whole time he's dropping stacks of money under the counter and I'm watching him and this dude. Since I laughed, I got his attention first, and that kind of saved both of us from getting fired that morning. My boss was able to save the deposit, our small change, and whatever other petty cash he had stuffed in the register drawer. Anyways, I know it's off topic, but I figured I'd share that, LMAO. Story 54. When I was 9, we went on a family trip to China. My family has always been the adventurous type, so naturally we couldn't just go look at the Great Wall or whatever. No, my parents hired a driver to drive us around rural Sichuan to visit yak farms and climb glaciers and crap. So anyway, one night we had to stop in the middle of nowhere. I think we ran out of gas or something, and ended up in what I guess you would call a village, although it was basically a long dirt road with one very creepy hotel and a few corrugated tin buildings. The hotel didn't look like much from the outside, but when you went in the lobby was this very creepy, almost Victorian-looking ballroom. The lobby made it seem like a luxury hotel, but when you looked closer, everything was made of plastic or painted cement, like a movie set, and completely falling apart, like no one had stayed there in years. At first, our translator told us they had no room, but I guess she explained our situation and they came up with a room. While we were checking in, I felt this malevolent presence behind me and turned around. There was a girl who looked about 12 or 13 in a shadowy corner of the room, staring at me with her mouth hanging open. She was barefoot and dressed in rags. At first I was sad because I thought she must have worked there, and she was only a few years older than me. But then she did this thing with her eyes that, to this day, is the creepiest effing thing I've ever seen. They went completely round and bulged out several inches from her eye sockets. I'd seen a photo once of someone in the Guinness Book of World Records who could do something like that. But this was a random child in rural China, doing this at me for seemingly no reason. By the time I got my parents and older brother to look, she popped them back in her head and looked normal. When we got to our rooms, there was mold on the ceiling and cockroaches everywhere. There was one bathroom for the whole floor down the hall. The lights didn't work. I went to pee with a flashlight. I turn it on, and the girl from the lobby is effing sitting there in the corner of the bathroom, in the dark, with her effing eyes bugging out again, just sitting motionless in the dark. Then she starts making this, sound with her throat, like the girl from The Grudge. I freaked the F out and ran back to our room. By the time my brother went, she was gone. So naturally, everyone thought I was making crap up / being dramatic. But then, when we went out to dinner, she was effing waiting for us in the lobby again. This time I made my brother look right away, and he caught the eye thing for a second, which is how I know I didn't imagine it. I don't think he wanted to admit it, but it definitely freaked him out a little bit too. We go to dinner at one of the little tin shacks down the road, and the effing thing followed us all the way there and sat down at the table next to us. By this time, I'm close to a panic attack. Every time I tried to point her out, she'd pop her eyes back in, so the most my family saw was a quick glimpse. They admitted there was something off about her eyes, but other than that, didn't seem too concerned. We got a lot of stares since there were no tourists in the countryside, but this was something else. IDK had to explain it, but I was positive she was staring at me specifically, like she wanted something from me. We noped the F out of there early the next morning. I can't prove this has anything to do with making cursed eye contact with this girl / spirit / demon child, but some creepy things that happened on that trip and after. We had tea, and my tea leaves spelled out toxic. My brother got really sick. He blamed the food and lost quite a bit of weight. I started getting really depressed / moody without knowing why. Eventually, I'd be diagnosed with major depressive disorder as a teenager, but I don't remember having any symptoms of depression before that trip. I posted about this on a different Reddit thread, and someone commented, "Looks like you found Dao Si Kui." So I Googled it, and, well, guess that explains my self-unaliving attempts. Story 55. I was 18 at the time, having just finished high school, and went with my friends on the beach on our motorcycles. 18 is the legal driving age. A friend had just gotten his bike modified and recommended that I take it for a spin. Stupid 18-year-old me said sure, left my helmet behind, and got on with shorts and a t-shirt. Note here that it was the second time driving that bike, and it had no ABS. I was driving for like 10 minutes in a straight country road, and eventually decided to head back. On my way there, I was really speeding, stupid 18-year-old me, and decided to overtake a car in front. Gear down, revving, and just as I'm approaching to overtake, the driver decides to do a U-turn out of the blue. I do not recall much from my reaction. I slammed the brakes, and then I saw a sort of flashback of my family's faces, thinking that I would never see them again. Then, some seconds later, I realized that I stopped. literally a yard or two away from the driver's door as she was eyes wide, staring frozen at me. I recall the time of overtaking the car and my speed, and honestly, I cannot tell you how I did not die there. This changed my life, the way I think, and it gives me chills every time. Story 56. Not exactly unexplained, but certainly creepy enough to have an effect on me to this day. September of last year, sleeping in the upstairs bedroom facing the road, and I'm suddenly jolted awake by the sound of footsteps on gravel. I'm quite sensitive to sounds of foxes and cats on the gravel driveway leading through to our back garden, so I was ready to dismiss it and doze off again until I realized that the footsteps were unmistakably human. I check my phone and it's 3 a.m. I get up, rouse my partner, and move into a room facing the back window to see if I can spot the potential intruder. At this point, I'm concerned about my bike being stolen, as it was chained to the outdoor table with a bike lock, but otherwise out in the open. Instead, I see the dark shape of someone staggering in circles around the central table in our back garden, just going round and round, muttering occasionally and gibbering incoherently. This person then begins to slam their head and hands repeatedly against the back door, whilst making slurred sounds that I couldn't understand. This person, a woman, then thrashes against our aviary for our parrots and tears off segments of mesh netting in an attempt to get inside it. This is behavior that I'm only normally familiar with in zombie movies, so I was utterly speechless when watching it play out in real life. Turns out, she was as pissed as a fart. We called the police, who kindly escorted the woman off our premises. Turns out she lived on the other side of town. We have no idea why she decided to single out our house to traipse around in. So, not exactly unexplained, but certainly creepy to me, and I consider myself fairly resilient to being creeped out. Having something like that happen in the vulnerable hours of the morning really sent my head into a total tailspin. Story 57. I was very depressed a year ago. Tired all the time, hopeless and numb. I had no more tears to cry and was done with life, but I was too much of a coward to end things. The love of my life ghosted me for another girl. He was my friend and my confidant. All my friendships ended. I felt that life was passing me by. Between college and my internship, I would sleep all day and eat fast food. I hated life, still do sometimes, and myself for not being enough for anyone or even myself. I would stare at myself in the mirror and hit myself and say ugly things about myself. I was isolated from everyone. One night, every inch of emotion came back, and in tears, I asked God why he hated me so much. Why can't I just be happy? Why am I not enough? Please, just kill me. Why do you hate me, God? Because every time I took a step forward, I would fall down 10 steps back. The next day, a Friday, after my classes had ended, I took an Uber to my internship. Around 6 p.m., my internship ended, and it was time to order an Uber home. But no Ubers were available, so I tried a different app, but somehow my debit card was not working. So I had no choice but to walk 30 minutes home, which isn't bad at all for me, but I was mentally exhausted back then. I took a shortcut through my college campus to feel safer. As I'm walking, very slowly, I feel that someone is following me and is kind of trying to catch up with my pace. So I moved to the side to let this person pass me. When I got a glimpse of this person, I could tell it was a very short Asian female, maybe 4'10" or 11, and she was dressed like a little kid. She gets really close, personal space, and smiles at me and tells me her name. I don't want to talk to anyone. I was angry at life and didn't want to entertain anyone, but I told myself, don't be a female dog, it's not her fault your life's a mess. So I put on a smile and introduced myself. Then she said, I just want to tell you that God loves you very much. Then we parted ways. I was blown by this. Just the night before, I had asked the Almighty why he hated me so much, and now he was telling me that he loves me through what I believe to be a human angel. I tried to maintain myself, but I was overwhelmed by emotions. I got home and broke down like a baby. Maybe I'm not alone after all. I'm not a religious person, but I like to think there's more to life. My university is very liberal, not a religious institution. Story 58. When I was about 12, I was the last person in the barn at night. I was shutting off lights and started to get a really bad feeling, as if someone was creeping up behind me or like something really bad was about to happen. It was mid-January, freezing cold and windy, and all the horses started freaking out more and more in their stalls. I tried to tell myself it was just because of the wind and how horses are notoriously antsy, but after a minute I couldn't ignore it anymore and hightailed it to my horse's stall. I went in just for him to comfort me and warm me up a bit before I walked home. But he pushed me to the back of the stall. Typically, this is a very dangerous position to put yourself in, even with a horse you trust, but I just had this feeling that he was worried about something, and I inexplicably just let him push me. After a couple minutes of standing next to him in the near darkness with my heart absolutely pounding, I tried to go look and see if there was anything out there. But he didn't let me move. He swung his head around to block me and gently put his shoulder against me so that I couldn't move or see anything past him. After a while, I really have no idea how long it was, the other horses started to quiet down little by little, and he took a little step away so that he could nuzzle me the way he did when he just wanted treats or affection, and I realized he was going to let me leave. I was so scared when I finally left his stall that I sprinted the mile-plus home in the dark. I fell a couple of times on the ice and just kept getting back up to run full tilt in my riding boots. I don't know what was going on that night, if there was a stranger in the barn or if it was something else, but I really think he was trying to keep me hidden. The memory of the wind and deep fear that all the animals and I seemed to have still makes me sick to my stomach. I hate to think what would have happened had I not gone and hidden in his stall. If you've had a bad feeling and so do the animals around you, listen to your gut and get the F out of that situation. Story 59. I've had some strange experiences throughout my life, as we all have. Everyone gets truly creeped out by something at least once in their lives, but this one is the most memorable for me. The one that stands out is different from the others, more concrete. This is the only time I've ever seen something with my own eyes. This happened about 22 years ago. I was 8 years old. Me and my little brother lived with my father in North Alabama. My mother lived with her mom in Chickamauga, Georgia. We didn't really get to see my mom much due to issues my dad had with her. General irresponsibility on her part sometimes. Anyway, Chickamauga, Georgia is where the first part of the Civil War was fought, resulting in the most significant Union defeat in Western theater. There is a large area of Chickamauga that's a park now. I mean, it's huge. Well, my grandma, my mom's mom, lived right on the edge of the battlefield area. We didn't really know this or comprehend this at the time because it was just common knowledge around the area. No one really talked about it. People would take their kids there to fly kites on the huge fields, or to see a big tower you could climb up. Well, we had a party for my cousin at my grandma's house. It was specifically Christmas time because my grandma had her tree up in the living room. We were there for a visit and to spend the night. Everyone had a good time and it started getting late, so my mom had pulled out the couch in the living room and that was where me and my little brother were going to sleep. My cousin slept on the floor in front of the bed. I went to sleep and woke up in the middle of the night feeling strange. I couldn't move. Well, if I could move, I was too scared to move. I remember that. The Christmas tree was gone, and in its place stood a ruddy, rugged-looking old-timey soldier with his long gun at his side in a military-like position. He was just staring straight ahead. His attire also looked old. Those were my thoughts as an 8-year-old. He didn't move, and I also didn't move. The thing is, I don't remember what happened. I don't remember if it went away or if I fell back asleep, but I remember I turned over and my little brother's head was a dog's head in the bed beside me. Like, straight up, looked exactly like a dog's head. That was the strangest experience of my entire life. I have no idea what happened that night. One thing I do remember is, as I've been trying to debunk this in my mind, is that we had been blowing up balloons earlier in the evening for my cousin's party. I could have just blew up too many and got dizzy and it caused me to have weird dreams or something, but I don't know. It was so weird. Yeah, probably a little lightheaded from blowing up those balloons. I think that's great rationalization. Let's just go with it and not pretend that you just potentially got haunted by a Confederate soldier. Yeah, moving on. Story 60. When I was 12, I traveled to England for 3 weeks with a group called People to People. During the last week there, we were back in London at some hotel that I vaguely remember still having fire escapes on the outside windows of the rooms. Around bedtime, the chaperones would make sure we were in our rooms, then put tape on the outside of the doors. This was their way of seeing if we had snuck out at any point. Me and my roommate that night, Ryan, go to sleep as normal after room check. Then I wake up in the middle of the night. It's dark, but I'm naked now, which wouldn't be alarming typically because I've been known to undress while sleepwalking. Somewhere deep down in me, though, was scared, dreadfully scared, like my life was in danger, so I ran. I ran through the hall, completely naked, and without looking at the room numbers, somehow knew I was on the wrong floor of the hotel. I take the elevator to my floor, find my room, and the tape is still on my door. Ryan answers and is very confused. He doesn't know how I got out of the room, and neither do I. I put my PJs on and go to sleep. I thought it was a dream. I woke up with a different shirt on, though. First thing out of Ryan's mouth was, "How did you get out of the room last night?" He tried to tell some more of the kids at breakfast what had happened, and a few said it was impossible. I did not want to pursue telling anyone about it, so I told Ryan to let it go. He seemed irritated by that. I still have no idea exactly how I got out of my room, or whose room I woke up in. The only person who would know anything is Ryan, but there was no social media in 2005, and now I've forgotten his last name. Still F's with me daily, 15 years later. Objection! Objection! Social media did exist in 2005. It was called MySpace. Definitely existed in '05. And my MySpace profile song is still on my gym playlist to this day. So yeah, some things just never go out of style. Story 51. My story is not as paranormal, but it's still burned into my memory, and I cannot explain the unbridled instinct that took over my body. Well, story goes like this. I was a small 12-year-old girl who did not have many friends, and the little I did kinda used me as a doormat. Well, I was always desperate to be invited to hang out, even so. One day, a girl we will call Jamie invited me for a sleepover at her house. I was so excited, and I absolutely went without hesitation, even though she was one of the worst of my friends who walked all over me. Anyway, it goes well the first half of the day until it reaches night, and we went to let our dogs out one last time for the night. One, that was a Chihuahua, ran off into the tall grass and couldn't be seen. So I was drug out by Jamie to help look for the pooch in one direction down the neighborhood road, while her mom went and looked in the opposite direction. As we got farther and farther, it got darker and darker, till suddenly my skin went cold. Shivers went up my spine, my stomach felt heavy as a stone, and my body forcibly stopped. Suddenly, my primal instincts kick in, and I can't control my actions as I stop dead in my tracks. Feel the very depths of my head screaming to get out louder and louder every second I'm there. I speak up and tell Jamie we need to head back, but she tries her normal bossy ways. Suddenly I scream and begin sobbing uncontrollably as a wave of emotions overtake me. I throw such a scene, she rushes me back to her home and we go to bed. I come to find out later that there's a well-known predator in her neighborhood near where we were. I will never forget the pure unbridled instinct to flee in my life, and I do know that if not for that uncontrollable moment, neither of us may not be alive today. Story 62. Kinda late to the party, but oh well. About 4 years ago, I worked for the conservation department of a nearby town. My job was invasive plant removal and trail management. I was often in the woods by myself as I knew what plants to look for and was experienced with trail maintenance. I would work from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., Monday to Thursday, so it's not like I was in the woods at night, and there were normally people around as I worked. One day during late August, I was walking down a trail pretty far into the woods. I had hedge trimmers with me, which are pretty solid, and worked in a pretty rich town, so, being a small female, I wasn't too worried about being alone. It was getting to be the end of the day, so I was just walking down the path, not actually working. I hadn't seen or heard anyone else in quite some time. Up ahead, there is a bend in the path, and there is a large shrub blocking my sight from the rest of the path. I got about 20 feet from the bush when the hair rose up on the back of my neck, and I broke out in a cold sweat. I trust my instincts. I've had a traumatic experience in the past from not trusting them, so now when I don't feel safe, I believe myself. I dropped the hedge trimmers and sprinted back to my truck. It should have taken me at least 20 minutes to get back, and it only took me 10. I had briefly heard something running behind me at the beginning, but didn't turn around to look. I sped back to town hall and then went home without talking to anyone. Next day, my boss tells me that I'm not going out on the trails alone anymore. A person jogging later the day before had found 6 mutilated cats on the path right behind the shrub. Story 63. When I was small, my mother woke up in the middle of the night for water and found me poking and grasping at the front door. Not the handle, the door itself. She asked me what I was doing, and according to her, I told her that the door was covered in a white mist/fog substance, and every time my hand came near it, it disappeared. Problem is, I don't remember any of this. I remember that house, and I wasn't exactly a toddler when this happened either. I do, however, remember always thinking that the place was cursed. The whole place just felt off, but I tried not to think about it. In fact, here are some other weird things that happened there. My dad once went into the crawl space of the house and nearly fell into a hole which he said was big enough to drive a bakkie, what Americans call a pickup truck, into it. It was also the place where I nearly died from a severe allergic reaction to cheese. I've always eaten dairy, and that has never happened before or since. It did make me stop eating cheese for a while, though. Finally, one of our puppies that was born there died by bleeding from its mouth, eyes, ears, a-hole, etc. No explanation, and none of the other puppies were affected either. Many years later, my father ended up telling me that he found the house was actually built on top of a graveyard, which made me think about that big hole and how it may have been a mass grave at some point. Thank God I don't live there anymore. Story 64. About 10 years ago, I took a job in Bolivia and had to get some vaccinations for my visa requirements. Like many Americans, I had no insurance and was going to a Med Plus clinic that is attached to some select locations of a major grocery store chain where I live. I called ahead and drove an hour to one, only to arrive and find that I was misinformed and they were out of the vaccine. They sent me to another store about 30 minutes further away that they assured me had the one they were holding for me. I get to the next destination and again, they were out and refer me to another store, yet another 40 minutes further away. Frustrated and hungry, I walk over to the little deli/food area and get a chicken tender lunch with mashed potatoes and corn. They put the food in the white clamshell box, print the barcode sticker out, and tape it over the closed lid on the to-go box. Grab some plasticware and reach to hand it to me, and I decide last minute to also add one of those deep-fried burritos that are orange from all their greasy fried goodness. I watch the person peel back the label to open the box, grab the burrito in a little paper sleeve, and put the burrito into the to-go box and print the additional label for the burrito, which they again slap on over the seam to seal the lid back. This happened in plain view to me as I'm hungrily eyeballing all the movements of this food. I was the only person in line and they were the only person behind the counter. Now, this is where things get weird. They had partially covered the old label with the new one, and when I walked over to the register, they only scanned the one, and it rang up as just the price of the burrito. I had one of those gut feelings that happens rarely in life when you can actually feel the wheels of reality turning. It was palpable. I was very aware that the price was wrong, and I viscerally felt like my moral compass was being tested, and I chose to let it ride and only paid like $1.99 instead of what should have been about $12, because after all, this grocery chain had already wasted about 2 hours of my time, and who really cares about $10, so why not? Thing is, it just felt wrong. I can't explain it any more than that. I get in the car and head to my next destination to finally, hopefully, get my shots and be done with it. About 20 minutes down the road, I'm stuck in stop-and-go traffic, so I peel back the label and crack the box open to grab the burrito because I can eat it safely while driving and it's not there. Which doesn't computate at all because it has to be there. I check again. Definitely don't see it. I paw around in the tenders. I stick my fingers in the mashed potatoes to make sure that it's not somehow hiding under them, even though that's not really possible. I pull off on the side of the road. I look on the floor, under the seat. I open the box flat on the seat like a book and proceed to shuffle the entire contents of tenders, corn, and mashed potatoes from one side to the other. There's no burrito. I call the deli counter. She remembers me and vaguely recalls what I ordered and assures me that nothing was left behind. Mostly she's confused more than anything as to why I'm asking if somehow she didn't just put it in the box or if they found a burrito laying around somewhere because it escaped. It was just gone. So basically, I just sat there on the side of the road, hands covered in mashed potatoes, eating my chicken tenders, musing over the nature of reality, trying to reconcile the two divergent empirical truths I was experiencing. Just sat in total silence for about 10 minutes. Then I wiped off my hands, buckled up again, and drove on. I mean, you didn't get your burrito, but you still only paid $2 for your $10 meal. So this whole thing about the moral compass and, the heavens above punishing you for bad karma and whatnot, I think you still made up pretty well in that. So yeah, hope you enjoyed your meal. Story 65. This happened in 2008, shortly after my 17th birthday. My dad and I were best friends. We supported each other through a lot, and we just emotionally understood each other. He used to tell me, "I can read your face and body language like a book. You can't hide secrets from me." And he was right. He always knew when I was upset, even if I put on my best thespian act. We used to talk about everything, from science to religion. He was a devout Christian. I told him one day, "When you get to heaven, you'll have to let me know if it's there or not." He laughed and said he'd make it rain on Tucson for a straight week. After my 17th birthday, he suffered a massive heart attack and passed away. I still tear up over a decade later. I miss him so much. The night before he passed away, my brother, father, and I piled into the car to go see a Friday night movie. My dad had tossed me the keys to practice my driving more, so I obliged and pulled out of the driveway and made my way towards the stop sign exiting our neighborhood. At the stop sign, he said, "You know what? I'm not feeling very well. Can you take me home and you two can go see the movie?" To this day, I can't rationalize why I said these words. "Do you want me to take you to the hospital?" He said no, and turning the car around when the pit of my stomach knew something was wrong is one of my biggest regrets. As he walked inside, I called out, "Drink some water, I love you." So at least I keep in my heart the last words we ever said to each other was that we loved each other. He passed away 12 hours later. He had been feeling the start of the attack. The story continues. The next night, after we spent all day at the hospital with his body, stroking his hair and telling him we loved him and such, we were all emotionally drained. My mother, parents were divorced, drove from California that day to Arizona to be with us and got a hotel room. My brother and mother had fallen asleep. I could hear their rhythmic breathing. I was sharing a bed with my mom, and there was maybe a foot gap between the hotel bed and the wall that separated me from the bathroom. I was replaying the events of the last 24 hours over and over in my head. What could I have done differently? How did I know something was wrong? Why didn't I just drive him to the hospital like my gut told me to? As I asked myself these questions, the room suddenly filled up. All available floor space was taken by a person standing, but they were all black shadows, no features. I wasn't afraid of them though. They felt familiar. Then I smelled it. His Sunday church cologne, only used to approach God's house. Now, I'm not religious like he was, but I respected his religious beliefs. Then I felt the warmth in that little foot space between me and the wall. I looked over and I saw another outline, but this one was red. I'll never forget that red. It was the purest red I've ever seen. It smelled like him. It felt like him. It was familiar. So I whispered to not wake my mother and brother, "I love you too, Dad. I'll be okay. Go with them." I felt what felt like a forehead kiss, and then the room was empty again, just as quickly as it filled. The whole event lasted a few seconds. The rest of the week, you can look it up on weather sites, it rained in Tucson for a solid week. But the story still doesn't end there. Fast forward to his funeral. Now, I want to give a quick history lesson as this is important. In ancient Greece, when someone died, they would place coins on the deceased's eyelids to pay for their transport across the river Styx. My father and I had many conversations about Greek mythology, and now I'm a Hellenic pagan. Service is over. We placed his ashes on the ground and buried him in the cemetery. Then the family sat in a circle and shared their favorite memories of him. My uncle gave a wacky childhood story. My step-siblings said how they had both recently found 2 stacked pennies in weird locations right in front of them. Like my stepsis worked at a vet's office as a receptionist, and she looked away and looked back and they were just there. I admit, I was jealous at the time. I talked about the thing I already missed. The jingle of his keys that he hung on a carabiner off one of his belt loops. Every day he came home from work, I heard his keys first, and I would get up and greet him with a hug and ask about his day, and I'd tell him about school. Sometimes he'd help with homework, or we'd make dinner together. I still carry my keys on a carabiner because of him. When everyone was packing up, I laid on the ground next to his temporary tombstone and just, pondered on life and death, memories of my dad. Mostly, what I think I was doing was feeling pain and letting it seep into the ground. Finally, my brother came over to me, gently rubbed my back, and said it was time to go. He left me to collect myself, and as I started to push myself up, I looked down, and right under where my head had been were 2 stacked pennies. They weren't there when I laid down, so I left them there, next to his tombstone, just in case he needed them. There are more stories. My father has continued to visit me every so often, mostly in the middle of the night. It wakes me up by starting with his cologne. I do not buy it, keep it near me, nor have anything with the scent. I don't because it hurts and reminds me too much of him. Then, a corner of the room darkens, and I feel like I'm not alone. Sometimes it's scary and unsettling until I smell it. I then talk to him, tell him what's going on. Then the darkness suddenly will dissipate, and the smell will vanish, and I'll feel alone again. A lot of this is unexplained, especially if you don't believe in the afterlife. A lot of it scared me for a long time, and I still can't explain the question I asked him. I can't explain his cologne coming and going within minutes in the middle of the night. And I can't explain the pennies and how they got there so quickly. And yeah, this is the story of my dad, Tracy, the man who made it rain in Tucson for a week in 2008. Story 66. A few, to be honest. This is the creepiest and a bit messed up, but it's like the universe aligned to keep me safe. I was living with my recent ex and his best friend. Bad time in my life. They went out clubbing to a town a good 10 to 15 miles away. They came back in the morning with a random stranger they met and a sex worker. I'd slept on the sofa that night, and I woke up to said random stranger, male, poking his head around the door and saying hello to me. He told me where he lived, which was a fair drive away, and how he got to my house and what they were doing upstairs, and asked if he could get some water and borrow a cigarette. We ended up outside talking. Like I said, crazy effed up time in my life. He started telling me how pretty I was, and he couldn't believe what my ex was doing, and how he'd treat me if I was his girlfriend. At one point, he attempted to cut "I love my name" into his chest with a knife, and told me he was going to buy the house next door because he could. Pretty sure he was on drugs at the time. A friend came and picked him up a couple of hours later. Fast forward 6 to 8 months. I was now homeless and sofa surfing. It was around 1 a.m. Me and a friend I was sofa surfing with decided to make a short walk to the 24-hour to get some cigarettes. Halfway there, we ran into a gang of lads, about 10 to 12 of them, and they started pulling me and my friend away from each other. My heart's racing remembering this. They did not have good intentions for us. My friend started screaming for me when I saw him. The stranger from my house from months ago. He noticed me and told them to stop and leave us alone. They did. He was part of the group. I don't know how. My guess is he was related or knew someone from there. We ended up making it through that morning safe, and I've never seen him again. I don't know what might have happened to us if I hadn't met him that morning at my house, or if my ex met someone different and brought them home. If I didn't have any cigarettes to lend him that got us talking. If he decided to stay home that day. If any small thing was different that day, me and my friend, at the worst, may not have been here today, and at the least be traumatized from what they plan to do to us. I felt like the most unlucky, luckiest girl alive. Story 67. I was 16. Just got my permit to drive, and I went to meet my then boyfriend at our favorite park to walk the trails in. This park happened to be outside of a rough and nearly empty part of town. It had a wide river running through the park, with a L-shaped pier that had railings on all sides of the pier. Only one way on or off of it. My boyfriend called and said he couldn't make it, and not wanting to go home just yet, I got out of my car and started to walk around the park. It was 2:30 p.m., and I can still see the breeze going through the trees all around, and how the leaves were just beginning to change their colors. I had on a hot pink jacket, jean skirt and boots. As I walked out onto the pier, I had realized I was underdressed as the wind coming off the water was too chilly. I had a gut feeling telling me to leave, but I brushed it off. I finally sat down at the end of the pier, leaning back against the railings, and stared down at the water below, running over the jagged rocks. Without any warning, I suddenly heard footsteps from behind at the beginning of the pier. I quickly glanced over at a man who had blue rope in between his two hands, circling up each end of it in either hand, creating a line between. As my brain was putting that piece of information together, he said, "What are you doing out here all alone?" I couldn't think of anything to say, but I stood up and then saw he was dragging along a medium-sized black and white fuzzy dog that was tied in a makeshift collar/leash to another piece of rope that was looped around the man's upper arm. "You're too pretty to be sitting out here by yourself." He walked towards me with a smirk on his face, looking down at the rope. He was roughly 10 feet away. Again, there was only one way to go on and off the pier, and I would have to run right by him to escape, which didn't seem to be an option. The only other way was to jump off the pier, but with the rushing water and rocks below, that didn't seem like a viable option either. In that moment, my stomach sank completely. The hair on my arms and my neck stood at attention, and still do to this day when I think about this. The fear, dread, and panic were overwhelming in my chest. I knew whatever was going to happen next was going to be absolutely horrible. The next few events happened quickly. I backed up until I bumped into the railing and squeaked out a small, "Please." The man closed the distance between us and was about 5 feet away. As I balled my fist up to at least put up some semblance of a fight, suddenly the dog planted his feet and started growling ferociously. The man pulled on the makeshift leash to get the dog to come on, but the dog turned to go the other way, still growling. This distracted the man for a brief moment, and he turned, kicked the dog, then turned his gaze back onto me. Mind you, he still has his hands bound in the rope. The man took one more step, and that's when the dog had enough. He planted his feet one more time, swung his head back and forth violently until the leash came off, bared his teeth, and clamped down on the man's Achilles heel. The man bent over, screaming in pain. He tried to get the dog off him, but his hands were bound. The dog released for half a second and bit into the man's calf. The man fell to the ground and was struggling to get his hands out of the ropes that were meant for me. I seized my opportunity and quickly moved by him and took off running. I ran until I got to my car, and as I pulled away, I saw the dog running out of the park at a full sprint. I know without a doubt that dog saved my life that day. Story 68. One night, I was in bed with my husband asleep next to me during a thunderstorm. I was watching some show on my phone, nothing spooky, and lightning flashes. On my husband's side of the bed, there are 3 windows, and when the lightning strikes, I can see the outline of the 3 square windows through the blinds from my peripheral. While watching my show, I all of a sudden get a feeling of dread, like the feeling before sleep paralysis occurs. I'm trying not to feed into the dread and continue watching my show when lightning strikes, and I don't see the square outlines from my side view, but a shape of something, like a person standing there with long hair. I instantly get goosebumps and try to not feel scared when my husband starts to make struggling noises in his sleep. I've had sleep paralysis before, so I know what it's like. What I did, as funny as it sounds, was to put my phone in my left hand and use my right hand to punch and swing the area above him, as though to attack whatever may be on top of him. He didn't let up much on his noises, so I rubbed on him aggressively to wake him up. He wakes up a bit and is a bit annoyed and says, "What? Babe, you were making noises like you were struggling. Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bad dream." I asked him to tell me. He said he was being chased by an ugly witch and she caught him and jumped on top of him and started to attack him. Instant goosebumps. The silhouette I saw kind of looked like a long-haired woman who may have been the witch. Who knows, but I finished my episode and told him what happened the next morning. We both agreed, definitely weird and random coincidence. Story 69. This is a very long story. If you're not trying to read, I understand. LOL. My brother and I had the typical horror movie experience. Parents divorced when I was 9 and my brother was 7. Moved around until our mom found a nice house for a cheap rent-to-own price. She didn't tell us because she didn't want us to worry about it, but 3 people had been killed in a break-in a year prior. So we move in and we all get to pick our own rooms. I'm drawn to the frontmost room with 3 big bay windows on one side and a small closet in the corner. My brother across a short hall, a bathroom between the 2 rooms. 2 weeks in, one night I could hear my closet door slowly creak all the way open. Every night for about a week this happened, and it scared me because I'd completely shut the door every time. I told my mom I wanted the doorknob replaced, so she obliged and I got a new one. This did absolutely nothing for me, so I started talking to the neighbors' kids. This was when I found out what happened to the family in the house before us. I was horrified. I was sleeping in the room of the child that lived in the house. He loved to play with his toys in the closet. One of the kids I would play basketball with was good friends with the kid. I always felt never alone in the room, just watched. My brother, on the other hand, was enjoying his life to the fullest because I didn't have the heart to tell him about the house. I did talk to my mom about it, though. She was very appreciative that I didn't tell my brother. A few more weeks go by, and my mom is getting ready for work, and she's locked out of her room. We do everything we can to get it open, and we finally do. All of us late for work and school. But then this becomes a recurring thing. She's locked out of her room with more frequency every few weeks. My brother and I start seeing the shadow. There are 3 arches in the house that connect the living room to the dining table/kitchen. So my mom hangs curtains on 2 of them to keep the sun out from the big TV we had at the time. She buys one of those light things that you plug into the wall to melt the little cubes of wax, and it really illuminates one of the arches. My brother and I start seeing this shadow. I come out of my room from a hard night of playing Black Ops 1. Good times, LOL. And I see what looks like a woman's shadow. I call out to my mom, but there's no answer. Looking a little hard, I can tell that it isn't even my mom's build either. This woman is tall and slender. My mom is 5'6" and more of a normal build. This shadow is more like 5'11" and pretty skinny. I open my brother's door and tell him to come out. We were both on COD, LOL. We're both freaked out and don't want to go over to see who or what it is, because why would we? This obviously doesn't look like our mom and it isn't moving at all. My brother comes into my room. We lock the door and we both sleep there. The next day, during my weekly basketball session with the neighbor's kid, I ask what the lady that lived in the house looked like, and I get described exactly the type of person we saw the night before. I don't finish playing basketball, and I go home to tell my mom what had been going on last night. She brushes it off, saying we freaked each other out because we both know what happened in the house. Literally, the same morning, she's once again locked out of her room by nothing. That was the last we saw of her. She removed the doorknob from her door because swapping it with a new one had done nothing. She eventually just gets one that doesn't have a lock on it at all. We beg her to just stay in one of our rooms, and if the shadow is there again, we'll wake her up and show her. She stays with my brother for the night, and once again, I was going to get water and I see it, just standing there in the front of the bright light shining up into the curtain. I wake them both, and my mom looks visibly scared for the first time of my life at the time. She calls out if someone was there, and she sees that there's no movement from behind the curtain. She inches into the living room to turn on the light. Something we as young kids definitely were not going to do, lol. And that shadow is gone. She runs past the arches and nothing. No one is there, and I see her wide-eyed and breathing heavy. She knows we haven't been kidding or messing around with her now. Alright, so there's quite a bit more to this story with other people involved, but this is already long enough. If anyone actually reads this and wants me to keep going, I will. Sorry for the lack of formatting. I don't really do this Reddit thing, and I'm on mobile.